This strange place since we've been here, and I think the unanimous verdict of the City Council was this is very small compared to the Billings Public Library. We got spoiled with elbow room and social distancing, but this room does offer certain technical advantages over that, so we're glad to be back. We apologize, though, that this room does not allow for electronic participation by the public. We're still working on that, but we anticipate that it'll be several months before it'll be possible for anybody to be heard by Zoom, unless the city administrator has a more recent update for us in just a minute. Again, welcome back. We encourage the public to participate in our meetings, and in order to do that, though, you've got to do it the old-fashioned way. You need to come here. And we encourage everyone to do that. Also, Article 2, Section 9 of the Montana Constitution allows or guarantees the right of the public to observe the deliberations of all public bodies. I think that's the quote. And there's some question about whether that allows for electronic participation by council members. Because if you're observing a TV screen, are you observing those deliberations? So at least at this point, we're all here and glad to be here. So I'm going to turn it over to our city administrator before we jump into our 4 items on our agenda, just to see if there's any preliminary items. In particular, Chris, if you would make sure to comment on the governor's lifting of the state of emergency. We enacted a local emergency declaration in response to that now probably almost a year ago, and I guess the assumption is that we need to revisit that, but what the process might be for doing so. So Chris, what do you have for us on that and other topics?
So Mayor and Council, yeah, that's first up. I have on my list here, Gina will be back from a little short vacation, good for her, later this week, and we'll look specifically at, now that the governor has lifted the state of emergency, I can't foresee any, but I want Gina to look over it to be sure, is there any negative effect of us lifting ours as soon as possible? And that if that needs to be done formally, I would anticipate that being on the 26th, since you already have your packet for the 12th, but we'll later this week get that defined. I'm also not aware of any downside if it stays there for an extra few weeks till we get to that formal meeting. I'm not aware of any negative impact the city has for holding it. There's no real reason to retain it. As I think I mentioned in the weekly, I think one of the few immediate effects to each of you, as well as our other formal board members, is that you cannot participate, according to prior Attorney General opinions, in a formal meeting with the state of Montana, whether you're a council member or just, let's say you're a planning board member. You cannot attend those remotely. You have to be present. So if you're not present, then you're absent. You can't phone in, you can't Zoom in. All of that was allowed under the state of emergency. And the legislature did not make any changes. There were attempts at making some of those things allowable long-term. None of those passed. So one of the most affecting things I know for all of you is, say this evening, if Ms. Purinton wanted to participate but would have felt more comfortable participating from home because she's not feeling good, that's not an option to participate from home. Just need to have an excused absence tonight. We'll look into more details there. Third one, if I dare, I guess question maybe sanity by even throwing this out, but over this past year, and the chief affirmed for me again this morning, lots of complaints about fireworks. And I was told about a story about how the city council said, we're going to enforce fireworks. And officers were told they are going to work overtime and you're going to ticket. I don't care if it's a 5-year-old holding a sparkler, they're going to get a fine, and just how fun that was. In a previous life, I've had cities that have allowed them for 2 or 3 days a year, the 3rd, the 4th, New Year's Day. I don't see any difference in Billings, Montana, to be honest with you, from the cities that allow them for a few days versus those that don't. But we do get a lot of issues relative to why aren't we enforcing that law. So If we're looking for something to do in this next 12 months, it's not an immediate discussion now, but it might be a good one to circle back on if we ever want to adjust those regulations to some degree. I believe Chief St. John and the police department would appreciate not being expected to enforce something that arguably is not really enforceable during some hours or some days. Third up is just a reminder. We've said this a few different times, but I'd encourage you to drive 29th and 30th Streets downtown on a regular basis. We counted, we did traffic counts before they turned to two ways. I'm looking forward to seeing what they look like after they've been two ways. Probably the biggest challenge has been back-in parking. I did it for the first time myself. I will admit I had never done it before, seen it in a few other cities. It really was easier than I thought it was going to be, but some people have been complaining about it, and we've been putting kind of cars to show the right way to pull in, and this morning I only saw one that was parked the wrong way. So I think it is catching on. If it fully catches on, we'll have a conversation about getting rid of the variety that we have downtown. We got front angle, we got back angle, we got parallel. So I think at some point we'll want to be much more uniform after this test. And I encourage you to drive those streets and see how much easier it is to get from the hospital corridor downtown and back and forth. And last but not least, Debbie is going to talk a little bit about water and some of the challenges or issues. You may have saw the Q2 or the Color 8 stories as we've been trying to get some word out there relative to, I was corrected today, apparently we get 14 inches of water in Billings, Montana, moisture each year. That's not a lot. Or a dry, arid climate. And this year, with all these high temperatures, it's been pretty challenging to keep up with. So I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to have her share with you some of what's going on there.
Hi, Mayor. Oh, is it on? Yep. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is different to be back, but this is good. So it's been hot and dry. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but it's been a hot and dry June. This is not, oh, it is. Kevin, I was going to tell you didn't have it set up, but you got it. So we're fighting a couple different things. I was just going to kind of tell you where we are. I just have 4 slides. It was easier to show you than tell you about it. But our river, you can see there on the left-hand side, normally we're where those triangles are. So we're running over 20,000 CFS. We are running under 7,000 CFS today. So the river is extremely low. You can see there some of the numbers. The minimum was in 87, but we're sitting, today we're at 6,800. We were at 7,200 last week. 25th percentile is at 13,000, and normally we're right around that 21,000. So you can see the river is very, very low this year. The one beside it there is last year, and I just show you so that you can see a typical year. Our water system is running hard. We're hitting over 57 million gallons per day. We're rated for 60 million gallons per day, but we don't run 60 million gallons per day on an extended basis. We've been running above 50 for a long time, weeks, and our system doesn't usually see that until August. So between the high demand, over 40 million gallons per day are going on lawns for the most part. We're seeing it 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. Those are our peak times, so we're definitely seeing the irrigation peak here. At those numbers, we're somewhat limited in our processes and in redundancy. So we're running everything we've got for the most part. That consistent high demand means very high chemical usage. And then, like I said, the peak periods, we're seeing times where we are above 60 million gallons as far as what the use is. So we're seeing our reservoirs go down and having a hard time keeping up. You can see there on the right-hand side, this is a reservoir that Chris uses. Yeah, I'm pointing you out, Chris. You can see here over the matter of days, we couldn't fill it. So every night we were getting lower and lower, and you can see those numbers there. So 27 is where we like to be every night so that it, as we use it, it goes down, and the highest we could get after that was about 25. A little over 24, 25. So this is what we've seen across our system, just a really hard time when we have multiple days in a row at these high use days. And then our equipment's overheating. You can see this fine job our operators have been doing to make sure everything's running. We have fans on all our equipment. When it's 100 degrees and they're running nonstop for weeks at a time, it's pretty tough on the equipment. So they're doing a great job keeping everything running. So a couple things just so you know what could happen. If the river continues to drop, we do have an alternate intake that we can use. We're using our L structure right now. We can move over to our intake 2. Problem with that is we can't put it through the same sedimentation that we do, so we're not going to be able to push as much water through. So if the river gets significantly lower, we're probably going to have to move to our other reservoir, our other intake, and we won't be able to treat as high as we are right now just because there's a lot more sediment in our system that goes through the processes. So we could go on about that, but I'm sure nobody wants to know all the details of that. So water rights, we're in good shape. We have old water rights. We have older water rights than a lot of people. So if the river does get really low, we'll be one of the last people that are told you can't use water. So we're okay from a water rights standpoint. What could happen, like I said, equipment failure with the heat and the continual demand. Also, if we continue to see those really high peaks in the morning, we might have a problem serving those if we just don't get any breaks where we can't fill our reservoirs. So just want to let you know right now that that's what it's looking like. Online, they do have a probability of how low the river's going to get. This is what it is. We can operate on that, so looks like maybe we'll be okay with the river depending on where we go now. So we have a plan in place. We're increasing capacity as far as we're trying to bring in extra pumps, bring in some redundancy just where we can, and protecting our equipment like you saw with those fans, purchasing extra parts, anything that we think could possibly go down, we want to have those parts on hand. Chemicals are the same way. We're running extra shifts right now, just making sure we're watching all our equipment and our reservoirs very carefully. The next piece here is something that we're going to start doing a little more, and that's we're seeing over 16 MGD going to the far west end at 4 a.m. Everyone's got their sprinklers on at the exact same time. We really need to get out and start educating people on moving that just a little bit on one way or the other. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or when people water, we need to have some Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays. Any of that kind of thing will really help the system. So we're going to get out and start trying to educate people and get some people helping us out that way. Brown lawn is okay. You don't have to have bright green lawn when it's 100 degrees. And then we may get to the point where we're actually going to say, okay, if you're on the east side of the street, you're Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you're on the west side, you're Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that. So we may get to that point. I hope not, but we may see something like that. Then, of course, the last thing, restrictions. I don't think we'll get there, but I showed you what could happen. So we're doing everything we can to get it from going there. So anyway, just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are.
Thank you very much. Debbie, I think everybody will want to know if there's some magic objective trigger point for going to any of those restrictions, if you know.
One of two things. Either the river will get low enough that we have to move to that other intake. If we move to that intake, we'll really struggle to supply the water that we need or the demand we're seeing. So if the river gets lower, that could be a trigger. The other thing is if we have equipment failure at the plant, that could be the other thing that we would possibly see. I think we'll go to these alternating days and doing some of those things first. But those are the two things that I think could happen.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Debbie? Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Ronnie?
Thank you, Debbie. Can you tell how this is impacting at all as far as water to the Heights Water District?
We haven't had any impact to servicing anybody yet. So we've been able to serve the entire population at the demands they're asking for. A little bit lower pressure certain times just because we don't have our reservoirs full, but we are able to serve as of now.
Okay, follow up, Mayor?
Sure.
So I guess in relation to if you start asking people to water certain days, will you ask the Heights Water District then to lower the consumption at all?
We will, if we go to that, it'll be across the city. So even though they're Heights Water District users, they're still within the city. So I think we would ask and expect the same thing for the entire city, not just for our users. Probably work with the Heights Board to see if we can send out communication in coordination with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you. Debbie, thank you for this. I will share, for me, your message is a little bit confusing in that I would hear this is the seriousness of what's happening with our equipment, but the river's okay, we may not do the restrictions, but I'm not really sure, are you just giving us a warning that something is possibly coming? And if something is possibly coming, when should people expect to hear the actual serious message of, we are putting these in place? Or are you hoping people will just do your suggestions now? When will it not be a suggestion anymore? and now it's restrictions in place.
Right. So the reason I came tonight was because of the news that several other Montana cities are under restrictions. And we've had some questions, are we going that direction? Like I've showed, there's some points that maybe we will end up there, but we're not there yet. So it was more just to give you a heads up. If something happens, it's going to happen immediately. It's not going to be in time to come here and give an update. It'll be an email to you saying we lost our intake or we lost these pumps or something. So I wanted to give you that background so that if we did go to that, you would have that information. As far as when it could go from a suggestion to a directive, again, we're just going to kind of keep monitoring the river, keep looking at our reservoirs, see how much we can continue to supply. We have had stories on Color 8 and KTVQ asking people or educating on what's going on and saying, you know, if you can water at a different time or a different day, please do so. So we're starting that outreach, but we're not to the point where we're saying you must do this.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, is this going to significantly impact your guys' budget and warranties and things like that on equipment?
So our budget is going to be very good. We're making a lot of water this month, so of course the water rates are paying for a lot of that. I don't think we have anything that is new enough that we might be seeing some of that wear and tear too early on our equipment. The water plant's been pretty tried and true on the processes that we're seeing. We did get some additional pipe in the ground this last year that's going to be helpful. So does that answer the question? Yeah.
Thanks.
Our chemical budget's our numbers are going to be really high on chemical usage this year. You'll see that.
Councilor Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, if the unforeseen happens when some equipment goes down that's not redundant, that means we got 8 to 12 hours. How are you going to get the word out soon enough, like you just showed the reservoir that Chris draws off of, you can't keep it full now. And so that 8 to 12 hours is based on full reservoirs, isn't it?
Right.
So you're not going to have much time to tell everybody to quit using water. So how do you plan on getting the word out to 110,000 people?
We'll probably use Code Red, the program or the notification system that's in Yellowstone County. Probably use the media as much as possible. I'm sure they'd be happy to help us run some stories. We have email addresses for a lot of our users, so we could possibly do an email blast. We would use all of those sources.
Okay, follow up, please, Mayor.
Go ahead.
And then, like I was talking to you before the meeting, what can we do to expedite the west end? It's if we have another winter like we had last winter and the following summer, we're going to be hurting. So is there any way we can shave 6 months, 8 months off of the final product?
So thank you for the question. This is exactly the situation that we're building the reservoir for. I mean, this is showing us why we're doing this. We have shaved some time off by using the alternate delivery. I think most of you remember we brought a resolution forward about 3 months ago asking to use alternate delivery for our project. So we have selected the contractor for the pipeline already. We'll bring that contract here in the next month or so. And we are selecting the contractor for the plant as we speak. The proposals are due. So those two will be under construction within months. The intake will be bid later this fall, and so we're going to be able to start construction on that probably over the winter, early spring. We're a good 2 years out, though, on construction being complete. At this point, by using the CMGC, which is the construction manager, general contractor, we're working as fast as we can. We don't have to wait for the whole design to be done. We can start building what we know and then just start designing and moving into construction as we get designs complete. So this is the fastest way I think we can build it.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Councilor Trickey, last questions, and we'll get into our regular agenda.
Sure. Okay, so given the current data, we're now looking at a 5-year drought, which, well, that said, once this year's over and we've got a little bit more time to think about it, do we need to implement some more intermediate stages of restrictions and warnings and stuff like that?
Moving into next summer, Is that what you mean, into the future?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
before we get our
obviously
next
we
plan
can-
online?
Yeah, we can try to
Right.
put some in place right now, but we would be just rushing it. But,
Right.
getting it in place for the future.
We certainly could. I think over the winter, maybe what we do is education in the water bills. If you water on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you're going to get better water pressure. So if you want better water pressure, move to those days. So there are some benefits to doing it as well. So we'll start an education over the winter and so that people are more aware over the summer how they're affecting the system.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you for this heads up. I hope it's all irrelevant, but somehow I fear it won't be. Let's move on then to our agenda. We've got 4 items tonight. The first 2 I would predict are more time-consuming, the marijuana legislation, medical marijuana ordinance. Second, the American Rescue Plan. In a perfect world, if we could get through each one in 45 minutes, we would move then to a break and then finish up with the last 2 items. I don't want to say worst case scenario, but they may go longer than that. So let's hope not. First up, though, our marijuana legislation update. We've got a new guest at the table. Chris, would you introduce Karen and anything else on this item?
Be happy to. So with us tonight is Karen Tracy. So Karen is our deputy city attorney. Karen's been with us since August of 19, so relatively new, but not new to local government. So let me just share a little bit of Karen's background. We're very grateful to have her on board. So she clerked for the Travis County Appellate Section and clerked for Texas Third Court of Appeals while a student at the University of Texas Law School. So she's, I used to say when we first got direct flights between Montana and Texas, bring your money from Texas, bring your guns, and I used to say not your lawyers, but we thankfully got a great one. So she's not just here temporarily, she's with us. She's prosecuted criminal cases for the Dallas County District Attorney's Office and served as an assistant city attorney for the city of Dallas, primarily in the areas of employment law and contract litigation. So she's been a great part of our civil as well as now helping on the criminal side. She also represented the city of Dallas, city of Sherman, and Irvine, Texas, while in private practice in Dallas, and served as vice chair of the Civil Service Commission and Personnel Trial Board for the city of Mesquite. So as I mentioned earlier, we brought Karen on board in August of 19. We're excited to have her. She is an enthusiastic supporter of open government and governmental immunity. So if you want to talk about that more, I'm sure she'll have a lot more she could tell us about that when we have more time than 45 minutes to talk about marijuana. So with that, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. I really, truly am enthusiastic about governmental immunity. It's the taxpayer's purse, so it does not come from a little pot of gold. Most of you are aware that the voters voted in Initiative 190, which authorized adult use marijuana here in the state of Montana. That happened in conjunction with our presidential and federal elections that occurred. Oh, thank you. That occurred on in November of 2020. After that, the Montana legislature met and they looked at what had been passed with the 190 initiative, and they said, well, we'll keep some of this, we will undo some of this, and we will add some more of this. And so right now, that is what we have. We have parts of the 190 initiative on adult use marijuana that was approved by the voters. It was also approved not only statewide, but by the voters of Yellowstone County by approximately 1,142 votes. Within the city of Billings, however, it was approved by more than 4,000 votes. So that tells you that the voters within the Billings city limits in Yellowstone County were much more enthusiastic about passing the 190 initiative than those who were within Yellowstone County but outside of city limits. So this is the landscape that we're working on, and it's important for your policy purposes to know that this did in fact pass both in Yellowstone County and both within the city of Billings. When the legislature met, it took them a while to hammer out House Bill 701. That was signed by the governor on May 18th of 2021. It is less than 2 months old. It has not even been codified in the statutes. You have to kind of take a piece here, there, and everywhere. And this is what we have that is less than 2 months old. It amended parts, like I said, of the 190 Initiative and the Montana Medical Marijuana Act. It merged some parts, and then it added the new provisions. When the House Bill 701 was passed, it did change a lot of the effective dates of the provisions of the 190 Initiative. A lot of things that we would be right in the thick of at the moment are pushed back to January 1st of 2022. But know that things are kind of barreling down on us at this point. The legislature has authorized 7 types of marijuana businesses. They're the marijuana cultivators that grow, the marijuana manufacturers that make things such as edibles or other types of products, the medical marijuana dispensaries, which were already authorized in Montana through the Montana Medical Marijuana Act. The city of Billings has an ordinance that prohibits storefront dispensaries. That provision of the Medical Marijuana Act was, that authorized Billings to do that, has been repealed. So we do have an ordinance that will need to be fixed. There are also adult use dispensaries that do not require any type of prescription, that have some restrictions tied in with those. Combined use marijuana licenses, if you're going to sell both adult use and medical marijuana. Testing laboratories that will test the products to make sure that they comply with the state regulations regarding THC levels. And then the marijuana transporter facility, which controls and limits the people and entities that can move marijuana around and within the state of Montana. You will not be able to get marijuana products via commercial shippers. This will not be coming to you by Amazon Prime. It's important to know that as part of House Bill 701, the only entities that will be able to sell adult use marijuana come January 1st of 2022 are those that are already authorized for medical marijuana, because those entities have already been cleared, screened by the state, met the licensing requirements to sell medical marijuana. The state has provided that for the first 18 months of marijuana sales in Montana, there is basically, in essence, a monopoly by the medical marijuana dispensaries. They're in the business already. The theory, I presume, is that they know what they're doing. We know who's running these, and therefore these are the most appropriate transition businesses for the sale of adult use marijuana in Montana. And because we passed the 190 Initiative in Yellowstone County and also in the city of Billings come January 1st. If nothing else occurs between now and then, these 7 businesses will be permitted within the city of Billings. In other words, if nothing else happens, no ordinances, no regulation, no zoning, no voter referendum, come January 1st, these businesses can operate within the Billings city limits. And as you can imagine, that's a cultural shift from what we've had before. So we're coming to you today with this update and to get direction from council as to how council believes that they wish to proceed. Because the City of Billings and Yellowstone County passed the 190 initiative, the City of Billings voters within the city, not the county, the City of Billings voters can be asked one more time whether or not they want to disallow any of those 7 categories. If City Council decides to put this to the voters one more time, and they could ask the City of Billings voters, would you like to have cultivation, manufacturer, any of these categories? The voters could be asked to say yes, yes, no, no, however, which businesses they want. In the event that the City of Billings voters are asked about that in a voter election, and they say no to any of those 7 categories, this council may not authorize those businesses. So the voters have a full stop method of disallowing those if for some reason they would change their mind. So that you can keep in mind the election results, within the City of Billings, the 190 initiative was approved 55% to 45%, to give you an idea of the percentage split. The other thing that you should be aware of is based on the best data that I could glean, it also passed in 4 of the 5 wards for the City Council. It appears to have passed in each of those wards decisively other than Ward 4. So the City of Billings voters, one option is to ask them one more time, do you want all 7 of these categories? Do you want, 5 of them, 4 of them, and whatnot? The other option is if a vote is not taken again, that the legislature left open the door that the City of Billings, your City Council, can regulate the sale of those 7 businesses here in Billings. They left a lot of latitude. They actually took some of the prohibitions that were in 190 and said, no, we're not going to let you tie the hands of local government like this. For example, and this is a correction to my staff memo, the 190 initiative had very clear language that you cannot prohibit adult use marijuana sales and marijuana businesses. Full stop. You cannot do that. And that was in the 190 initiative that was passed by the voters. When the legislature met, they said, no, we're repealing that. So there lies within the council's discretion a lot of latitude on what type of businesses you want to permit, how you want to permit them, how many of those licenses you might want to authorize, where you want to zone those. There is a lot of discretion, and the legislature has left that door open. Of course, the more restrictive the ordinances, the more litigation the city may face. So we had red before, where the voters can stop everything or anything, some of it or all of it. Then we have the ability, yellow light, for the council to regulate, zone, license. And this is where the language came in, where the legislature said that even if the voters approve a category of business in a repeal election, that the council may allow that type of business to operate. So it appears that the legislature has intended to say that even if the voters say all 7 categories, we want all 7 categories, the city may permissively allow those businesses to operate. So we believe that there's still quite a bit of discretion. The one thing that was repealed expressly was our ability to prohibit storefront dispensaries under the Medical Marijuana Act. That ordinance, I believe, is no longer effective. So City Council has the latitude to move forward with licensing and zoning in lieu of a repeal election, or attempting to prohibit entirely or extensively any of those 7 categories of marijuana. We're looking for your input regarding if you want to pursue an election repeal option, if you want to approve a licensing scheme, and what types of number restrictions you might want to look at. And then also the restrictiveness of the zoning requirements. If these businesses will be operating in Billings, do you want to look at zoning those in particular sections of the city? Do you want to try to control the concentration? And then with the licensing, how many types of licensing? Somebody brought up an interesting point to me the other day, is that these are cash businesses almost always, because banks do not want to risk their FDIC insurance. So if you go in to patronize one of these shops, you're paying in cash. They are full of nothing but cash in their stores. And so a lot of times they will hire off-duty police officers for extra work. And so limiting the number of retail licenses will help not have our off-duty police officers stretched overly thin. So that's one of the reasons you may want to limit the types. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that medical marijuana dispensaries, if you're not familiar with them, restrict the people who can walk into a business. You have to be a registered cardholder to even go into that business. There is a limit on foot traffic going into them, and there is a restriction on how much can be purchased in any given month based on whatever the prescription is that they have. The secondary impact of a medical marijuana dispensary is not as invasive on a neighborhood as an adult use dispensary would be, where you would have more car traffic, where you would have more foot traffic, where you would have more cash in any type of facility that would make it a potential target for crime. One of the things that is part of the law that we have right now is there is a 500-foot zoning restriction between a dispensary, no matter the type, adult or medical use, and things such as churches and schools. This council may wish, when considering licensing and zoning for adult use versus medical-only use, you may wish to tighten the zoning for adult use, given that there will be a lot more traffic here within our city, traffic that I would anticipate coming from neighboring states, people coming in to do their retail shopping. Yellowstone County a few years ago had a much tighter restriction on their medical marijuana dispensaries. They put a 1,000-foot restriction, and they also prohibited the location of those medical marijuana dispensaries as to parks, daycare centers, child care centers, as well as schools. The way that the state has defined the zoning, which you may find problematic, is that there may be a 500-foot restriction, but that's only 500 feet if they are on the same street. So if you have a couple of streets that are back to each other, you have Grand and you have a residential street that is right north of Grand. There's a street running through it. You might have a daycare back to back with a dispensary. Those could be within 500 feet. And according to the state law, that's just fine. They're not on the same street. Still, this is probably something that you will want to look at, and the legislature has been perfectly clear that it is within local government ability to zone more restrictively. Of the 7 categories, of course, your manufacturers and your cultivators are going to be a more industrial type of operation. Typically, transporters are just delivering or transporting from store to store or from a cultivator to manufacturer. those are probably not quite as intensive of an industrial type of a zoning issue. So we are looking for feedback from council as to how you want to proceed on this. We know that we have a medical marijuana statute or ordinance that needs to be fixed, and that we probably need to do some work in that area. I will attempt to answer any questions that you have in this brand new area of the law so that you have the information that you need in order to give us the direction that we're seeking.
Thank you, Karen. Excellent presentation and also excellent memo. We appreciate that clarity. I'll try to direct our questions and discussion, but Chris, did you have something before I do so?
Just in brief, I wanted to just also kind of say where we're going forward. So our anticipation tonight is to have the dialogue around there are 4 questions specifically. I'm sure there's more than that. As early as 2 weeks from tonight, continue the dialogue in another work session. Ultimately, our goal is to be back here late summer or fall with regulations for first reading, second reading, 30-day effective date, so that everything can be squarely in place before January when the laws all become effective. So part of my message here is we don't have to, the idea wasn't we're gonna walk out of here tonight with all the answers. This is the first of at least a couple of work session dialogues, and then getting into the meat of what's a draft ordinance literally look like. So just thought that might help set the stage a little bit for what we're thinking of.
Okay, thank you, Chris. This is a great opportunity for questions for Karen. Just a reminder to the council that although this is a work session and for members of the public, we don't have votes on anything during a work session, with the exception of giving direction to staff. And we don't even have to do that. It sounds like we'll have other work sessions and opportunities to drill down on this, but I'm sure staff would appreciate as much direction, and especially if there's a clear consensus by a significant majority of the council. We'll see how the discussion evolves. But just a reminder to council that there are 4 questions that have been targeted for us in particular, and I'm sure there are others, but whether we should go down the path of setting up an election to bring this back to the voters to potentially reject the default, which is, of course, that recreational marijuana will be legalized January 1 of 2022. Second, if not, what kind of regulations, specifically zoning regulations to particular areas? 3, is there a reason to make a distinction between medical marijuana and recreational use, or would we want to treat them more or less the same for those restrictions? And then last, a specific question of a numerical cap was also raised in the staff memo. So those are all things we can talk about and also ask questions of Karen. I'll turn it open for questions. Not included on that list, but one that I think is important that we not lose sight of, and that is described in the staff memo, is the issue of a county-wide local option tax. I've asked Chris, or suggested to staff, that they start working on a breakdown of cost. The staff memo identified some of the general categories where we're likely to see increased costs for licensing, investigation, code enforcement, enforcement of DUI laws where there's no easy standards for intoxication with a possible use of or exception of a blood draw, all of which is going to cost money. So that is another issue that's out there. It's beyond our power, but we certainly could encourage the county to do that by statute. I believe 45% comes back to the municipalities in the county, divided up by population. So all those issues are out there. Council, how would you like to begin? Councilmember Ronnie, Councilmember Yakwich, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the local option tax also, so I'll save that because you really covered that well, Mayor. Thank you. This is the first time that City Council has heard this presentation and has really heard the breakdown of what the state legislature came up with. So it's a lot to process.
Yes.
First time we're seeing your PowerPoint presentation. We didn't get that ahead of time. Hopefully that will be clarified and we will start getting those ahead of time. But a lot to process right now. Great presentation. A couple of questions that I've got are in regard to medical marijuana or recreational marijuana and the location zoning. And this may not be something you know, or maybe Chris or Kevin know this, but can you remind me what our location for space is for casinos and bars and taverns? Is that 600 feet or is it, oh, there's Wyatt. Sorry, I didn't see Wyatt there. Is it, yeah, is it 600 feet?
Let me just check. There's a couple different ones.
Okay, thank you.
And I will make sure I'm telling you right.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned something, you gave reference that the ordinance we currently have for medical marijuana is problematic. And is there the possibility then that we could start seeing medical marijuana facilities starting business in Billings right now before we change that ordinance? Is that something we could start seeing, or do we still have the ability to put regulations in place first?
There is still the opportunity to put the medical marijuana regulations in place, and I think it would be extremely advisable. The section that was repealed was, there was an express statute that said municipalities may prohibit dispensaries and storefront dispensaries. And the city of Billings definitely took advantage of that, and several years ago passed an ordinance that said no storefront dispensaries. There can be operating dispensaries, but no storefront dispensaries. That was repealed. The legislature chose to take that back. One of the most important reasons that I think that we need to take a comprehensive look at medical marijuana is that the legislature has said that only medical marijuana dispensaries that are in good standing with the state and in compliance with all local ordinances as of January 1st of this upcoming year are going to be able to sell adult use marijuana. So in other words, if we say medical marijuana dispensaries must be 1,000 feet from any school measuring door to door or park or facility, that is our standard for medical marijuana. And so if we have an operating dispensary that has no signage and that happens to be within 1,000 feet, they don't get to sell adult use marijuana at that specific location. And so the legislature has provided this type of transitional business from medical to adult use. But on the other hand, we have an opportunity to say, if you're going to be bringing people into your business to sell them medical marijuana, you must be this many feet from a school or a church. One of the things that may happen is that my instinct tells me we're not going to get a lot of businesses that will stay restricted to medical marijuana. I believe that the income and the business opportunity is going to be in your adult use marijuana. However, if there are specialty businesses that want to focus on medical, maybe they're in the hospital district or that's what they want to do, then I think that a less restrictive zoning of those businesses may be appropriate than somebody who's going to say, add on adult use marijuana with their medical marijuana. I think that if you're selling adult use, that warrants more restrictive zoning.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one extra. In regard to medical marijuana, because I see a big difference between medical marijuana and recreational. So with medical marijuana, and I'm trying to picture like what 1,000 feet is. It's
Football fields.
It's multiple football fields, right?
Three.
3 football fields, okay.
3 football fields.
So So my experience and observation with medical marijuana facilities, I'm not a user myself, but I've observed them and have spoken with people that use medical marijuana. They're truly using medical marijuana for some real condition that they're experiencing, whether it's cancer or multiple sclerosis or glaucoma or something like that.
Correct.
So is there, in regard to locations for medical marijuana facilities, can they be within a certain number of feet of public transportation, bus stops and things like that for those that use public transportation and probably can't walk 3 football fields from a bus stop to a medical marijuana facility? Is any type of restriction on those locations?
It would be difficult to try to give somebody access to public transportation necessarily while also restricting locations for churches or daycares. I do think because of the lack of traffic in a medical marijuana only facility, that you could permit a closer type of a zoning without impacting the neighboring communities. One thing that I found fascinating about the new language in the law that I was not aware of is that medical marijuana providers actually have the ability for an employee to deliver or to transport to a registered cardholder now. Okay. In addition to that, on a medical marijuana dispensary, a patient may designate 2 people to do pickup agents, somebody with a type of a power of attorney who could go in, pick up for that particular registered card holder, and is authorized to bring that back. So the legislature has provided much more delivery options for medical marijuana that are not available to adult use. Those who are delivering medical marijuana not only have to meet those requirements, but they have to keep a manifest that's required for delivery by the state. The state is looking to regulate from seed to sale and everything along the way. And so they want those shipping manifests showing delivery. You're just not going to drop it off and run like we get our Amazon Prime things. So I do find that we could probably have a looser zoning ordinance for medical marijuana only, and then also know that those businesses, even if they're selling adult use, have the ability to deliver medical marijuana, although not adult use.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. Wyeth, there's a variety of different separations depending on the size of the casino and residential versus other uses, but do you have a quick summary there?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council and Councilmember Ronning. So our current code now regarding casinos, the primary large casinos specifically, separating from religious institutions, primary and secondary education, public parks that contain children's playgrounds or playfields. We have a 600-foot separation. In the only districts where there is not a separation requirement is the Central Business District, the East Billings District, and the Industrial 1. And then we have a separation from residential districts of 350 feet measured from exterior of the occupied building space to the casino, to the property line of the residential district. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Councilmember Yakowicz and Joy.
Thank you, Honor and Council. Mr. Kukulski and Council, I think we should continue to have a robust discussion, but I am interested in encouraging you to form a committee. I'd like to be on that committee. Maybe other 4 council would like to be on that committee. Karen, you did a great job. I need to digest a lot of what you presented. So I'm just throwing that out. It's usually what we've done before, and we can digest that more in a committee and then bring it back to our council.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question. I guess it's kind of a little bit outside of the 4 questions. Is there litigation that might change some of the legislation that has been passed, so that are we making our regulations based on legislation that isn't going to be changing anytime quickly through litigation? Thank you.
I am not sure if you're referring to the litigation that's currently pending against the city of Billings, but from
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not being clear. I-190 passed. The legislature sat and then made this legislation. Are there any legal challenges to what the legislation that has been passed by the legislature?
I do believe that there is some pending litigation, but I have not looked into that at this time. But I heard in passing that there are some businesses who are challenging aspects of the statute. The manner in which we have looked at it is not within the rubric of the litigation, but simply what are our best practices and challenges to protect our community against the secondary effects that we anticipate from the marijuana ordinances and statutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions, Councilmember Wyatt and Tricky?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the items you brought up is that if we choose to go down one path, we have the ability to limit the number of storefronts. Can we say 5? Is that legal? Can we say 10? Can we say only 23? I mean, is there some formula?
The legislature did not say how restrictive that we could be. However, they did strike through language in 190 that said that the city could not put unreasonable restrictions on adult use marijuana. They just basically struck through that. So I believe that there is a lot of latitude within the legislature to be fairly restrictive in the number of licenses that are authorized.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tricky?
Very nice presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. First off, I'm assuming that the planning department is looking at those 7 different uses and zoning and thinking about, what might end up happening with them. Or rattle your head is fine. You don't have.
If I could just, Mayor and Council and Councilmember Tricky, I guess I would say we've been having that conversation with Karen, with legal staff administration, but we're also kind of wanting to figure out where you all want to go. There's been, back in 2010, the council considered a variety of zoning requirements at that time, some of what Karen talked about, separations, et cetera, different districts. So yeah, there's a lot of options. But yeah, we're certainly looking at that based on all the 7, I believe, uses or elements that she was talking about.
Thank you. So can you talk a little bit about the mechanism for repealing? And is there also a mechanism for repealing the repealing?
So if it is put to the voters, and Yellowstone County may also wish to have a repeal election. So we kind of have a donut hole of the city of Billings sitting inside Yellowstone County. So it is independent. Yellowstone County may wish to do an election. The city of Billings may choose to do an election. And based on the numbers, it's very possible, and it can be done in the same election. It's very possible it could be repealed in one piece of it, but not the other, because of how close the numbers are and how it shakes out. So when the election results would be finalized, those are effective 90 days after that election. So we need to look at the fact that we've got a January 1st deadline where all of these businesses are going to be authorized and be moving through a transitional period, and know that if we have a repeal election and our voters say, no, we don't want this, the statute's very clear that the council cannot authorize the categories prohibited by the voters. So there's no undoing that, in my opinion, without taking it back to the voters.
Yeah, I'm more worried about, I'm more trying to understand the actual process itself. So in case of the city or the county choosing to do that, it would have to either be this council or the county commissioners who would choose to do that.
Or both.
Or both, yeah, right.
Correct.
And there is no mechanism right now for like an initiative or some process like that to come from the voters?
I'm not sure if I understand your question, and I'm not as familiar with election law as Ms. Dahl is. I don't see, given the timetable, the election would have to be initiated by this council.
And a repeal then of that would have to be done by the council?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One last area I'm interested in, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So you may not have researched this part of it, in which case, I hope we can find out about it in future ones. But what are the issues around the do-it-yourselfers? The individual that wants to grow their own, or and also, what is possession? What are the issues around possession for them and stuff like that?
So the legislature has adopted a fairly comprehensive set of possession statutes, as well as the growing your own. You're permitted to have 4 seedlings. You cannot have your plants visible to the public at all. So you can't put it in your front bay window and leave your blinds open and have your plant in the front bay window. If you choose to have your potted pot plant in the backyard, you must also have it outside of the view of the public with an unaided eye. So you don't have somebody flying a drone over your property, you don't have somebody with binoculars looking into your backyard, and your backyard must be locked. So it's much like a swimming pool, where we don't want children coming in your fence, you don't want people seeing that attraction. There are provisions that landlords may prohibit the smoking of marijuana in their rental facilities. That's covered by the statute as well. However, landlords may not prohibit non-smoking consumption of marijuana to their renters unless it is a government-funded housing, so that we're not running afoul of Section 8 funding. So there are all sorts of rules and regulations, and they appear to be pretty comprehensive. But if you have a landlord that says no smoking in this rental unit, they can still prohibit that, whether it's tobacco, whether it's marijuana. But if you want to put your little pot plant under a grow light in a rental unit, if it's not Section 8 housing and it's not otherwise prohibited by this council, then that's going to be permitted come January 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, just a reminder that threshold issue here is to elect or not to elect, or to submit to the electors or not to. Are we prepared to offer tentative direction to staff on that issue? I think is a critical one. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think we have any option but to go back and see if we can get any of this repealed. But the question that I do have for you, when we start talking numbers of dispensaries, okay, we've got the medical marijuana who can now also be adult marijuana, and we can have just adult. Can we say 23 period? And that's a combination of all of the above, or do we have to specifically say this many medical and adult and this many adult? I'm wondering if we run into a monopoly kind of thing, because marijuana or medical marijuana could pop up.
I believe that you could do an umbrella of any retail provider, whether that be adult use or medical marijuana. You could probably cap the combination of it, or you could cap it by an individual category. So you may wish to, permit 10 medical marijuana only dispensaries that can have a less restrictive zoning. Or you could say, we're going to do, 25 of whatever there are, first come, first serve, and you have to be 1,000 feet away from any of these categories such as schools, churches, parks, things like that.
Okay, follow up, Mayor?
Please.
So when we start looking at all these categories, you got manufacturing, delivery, all of those things, can we have different numbers for each category and different zoning and each one of them is a standalone?
Absolutely, you could do all of those categories separately, and you may actually want to do those categories separately because of the secondary effects to the neighborhoods. You're probably not going to want to allow cultivation in a residential zone. You're probably not going to want to have very many adult use that could impinge on residential neighborhoods. It may be that the council wants to restrict those to specific parts of the city, and there's a lot of latitude to do that. A lot of latitude. I think the legislature has been very clear on that.
And one more, Mayor, and I'll
Please.
shut up.
Yeah.
So when we're saying unrealistic or realistic regulations on these guys, by whose standards? So if we say 1,000 feet from churches, schools, all that, and 500 feet from residential zones, I mean, is that realistic? Is that unreal? I don't understand who the judge is of that.
I think as long as it's a reasonable use of the police power of a city, you're going to get upheld on a rational basis. The courts are going to say, do you have a really rational reason for doing this or not? And I can't imagine that a court would say that there's not a rational basis to prohibit that within 500 feet of a residential area. Think about the fact that if you have an adult use dispensary that close to a home with that much cash, you run a higher risk of a resident being harmed in a criminal act.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. And just one final comment. I absolutely agree with Councilman Yakowicz that this is a big topic. A lot of different opportunities and options here. And I say opportunities. I think some opportunities here. So, you know, I absolutely support the committee approach.
Thank you, Councilman Brown. The only thing I guess I would comment based on your questioning is that does underline the need to have a good written record for the reason for doing things. If there is no basis and it looks like a dart was thrown at the dartboard, that would be much more subject to being successfully challenged. Courts probably are not going to try to second guess the legislative decisions of a body like ours as long as there was some rational basis for it. So, but we can focus on that. The other kind of question I guess I'd have for Karen is, are we doing anything to track what other cities in Montana are doing, coordinate, cooperate, follow what they're doing?
We are starting that process. Nobody has landed on a final resolution other than the older medical marijuana statutes. Helena approaches it from a zoning standpoint. Bozeman approaches it from a licensing standpoint, but those are only the schemes for medical marijuana as opposed to adult use marijuana. So we're in the process of reaching out to see how other jurisdictions are approaching that.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions or discussion? Council members Neese and Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I wholeheartedly agree with Councilman Yakowicz's comments about having a committee, and I would also be willing to attend that committee. And I also agree with Councilmember Brown about saying I think it's kind of a no-brainer, put this to the voters as far as the 7 different categories and maybe even to repeal. With that end, I guess I'll ask Chris, maybe you would know this or someone would know the timeline. I think when we start looking at the different options here, we need to prioritize them by time in order to get them done. We know January 1st is the deadline, but election has to be done sooner. So when do we have to have something approved by the City Council to go to the electorate for a vote to be on a ballot?
So Councilmember Neese, Mayor and Council, we need to go to that August date. We can pull it up. It'd be the same date I gave you for the public safety levy. So that meant the 85-day notice to the elections office to have it on the November 2 ballot question, if we were going to try to put it in concert with that. And then frankly, with the fact that all of this is going to become effective, whether you like it or not, January 1st, we essentially have that deadline, that anything meaningful has got to happen and be fully implemented by then. So if you're talking election, I think November 2, I doubt we would want to try to do some special election. You technically could between November 2 and the end of December, but that you have a general election coming up, and that we'll give you that exact date. We're pulling that PowerPoint out. I want to say it was the first week of August, maybe August 9th or August 12th, something in that neighborhood.
Okay, Mayor, if I may, I guess then I would like to direct staff to, or make a motion to direct staff to get a. No, not personally. To direct staff to have the election options presented as soon as possible, so that we can work on those first, because even if those are approved by, or they say they're disapproved by the voters, we still have to work on the zoning and any other options. So I guess my motion is to direct staff to move forward on the option for the election.
Okay, we'll flesh out what that means probably, but is there a second to that motion? Councilmember Yakovich?
Councilman Brown.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Brown? Okay. So discussion now on that motion. Is it clear to you, Chris, what you would do if this motion passes? Or do you need clarification?
Clarification would certainly be helpful. I'll have Karen weigh in. I think, though, it's clear the intent, if it passes, is to have a repeal question in front of voters as a part of the November 2 ballot.
Well, I would disagree with that because of our context, which is that we can only give you direction to do something, not that take that final action. So,
I'm sorry. So jumping way ahead there, bring back to you what do the necessary steps look like in order to go from where we are today to actually having the questions on the ballot, or the question on the ballot November 2. Whatever that would be. I imagine Karen and I would do research and give you those details at upcoming council work session and or council meeting in order to meet that target date to be on November 2.
okay, thank you, Councilmember Denise.
And I would just like to clarify that this does not preclude working on any other things. I'm not saying this is the only direction to staff, but we would like to move forward on this particular part of the question is on election options. Let's find something. So I want to make it clear, this is not only just that, but you were just voting on that particular portion of it.
Thank you very much. Now discussion on the motion, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I guess I need a little bit of clarity on what this motion is and what we would be taking to the ballot, because it feels like November 2 is really close to January 1. That feels like a really close period of time. So am I understanding correctly, and this may be a Roy question, maybe a mayor question, maybe a Chris or a Karen question, are we taking then to the ballot what we would determine and what this committee would determine and come back and propose to City Council in regulation type recommendations? Is that what we're taking to the ballot on November 2nd? Because it feels like if we're taking just random questions of what they would want to, what the voters would want to appeal of those 7 categories, that November 2nd and January 1 is a really close period of time.
And one of the challenges that we have is that the question that can be put to the voters is, do you want to disallow this category, this category, this category, this category? That's the election that's provided by the statute. The decision of the voters is not effective until 90 days after the election date. So if we were to have the election on November 2nd, that's less than 90 days before when all of these businesses can be authorized. So there may be a period of time that these businesses can operate prior to being shut down.
So if I can follow up with that, so my understanding then, that there is that possibility, if we wait until November 2nd, that individuals could go purchase property, could start operating, and then we would come in and shut them down.
Well, the only adult use dispensaries are going to be those that are already dispensing medical marijuana. So you will probably not quite have that type of an impact. You might have that type of an impact if somebody purchases a property with the intent to do cultivation or manufacturing. So there may be a situation where somebody goes out on Reliance and says, I'm going to make this property purchase. Having said that, however, we're permitted to zone those businesses, and we can zone those businesses right up until December 31st. So if you want to purchase property before December 31st, based on your hunch as to how zoning goes, how reasonable is that reliance?
All right, thank you. So it sounds like there's a lot of parallel work that needs to happen at the
Correct.
same time. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my thought on this process is the committee would go forward and assume that we're going to have all of those categories so that we have an answer for each one. And then if things are appealed, and I'm not hoping that everything gets appealed here, but I don't know that the residents of Billings want manufacturing here. Maybe that stays out in the county, those kinds of things. But my thought was the committee would have those pretty well figured out prior to the election, so that if it gets appealed, fine, we don't have to worry about it. If it doesn't, we've got it there for January. Because
I would agree with that.
Councilman Ron's right. I mean, that is so close.
Councilmember Ewell and Chris and Councilmember Boyette.
Point of order. I believe you called.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. I'm sorry, we got distracted.
Are you ready? I was actually debating on if this speaks to the motion, but I think it does. So I'm not going to fight council if the majority wants to move forward with an election. I don't have a problem with that. But the piece that I would advocate for is pulling out medical marijuana dispensaries from the list, because as a state, we've voted on this twice now. I think the people of Billings have been very clear about that one piece. And so that's what I would really advocate for, is that whatever the committee decides to have people vote on, that's not a part of it. And so we can move forward with those regulations now, immediately, and get that locked into place. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I apologize, Councilor Ewell and Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. So if, let's say, we had an election and manufacturing or something like that, they voted not to have it, but come January 1, 2022, they can buy a license for the year. So we're going to be right back in the same boat we are right now with the medical marijuana, because somebody's got a license for a year, and if it got passed, it's only good for 90 days, but they've already got the license. So
in that case, are you assuming that manufacturing gets voted down by the electorate? Okay, so if that happened, if that was the result of the election, the voters say, we don't want manufacturing or we don't want cultivation. At that point in time, then the city could pass an ordinance prohibiting those businesses prior to January 1st of 2022. The state will not issue any licenses that conflict with the duly filed ordinance by the city. So you could foreclose somebody coming in and throwing up a huge manufacturing facility or a manufacturing or a cultivation company quickly trying to get in under that 90-day window. If I'm not sure I'm being clear. So
it's a catch-22.
But you could. So say the voters come in and they say, we're fine with adult use, we're fine with transport, but we really don't want a marijuana farm in our city. Take it outside of city limits. The council could, on the day after the election, pass an ordinance that says we're not authorizing manufacturing or agricultural businesses, not agricultural cultivation, by ordinance. We're going to go ahead and say what the voters said they don't want, and we're going to rely on the legislators' language that says you may prohibit, and we're going to prohibit it. And you could actually do that by ordinance the same as is voted in by the voters.
Follow up, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So then they couldn't actually even start, even though state law says they could?
That is correct.
Okay, and then I got one more question. That, I believe you said early on that the only ones that can sell marijuana starting July 1, 2022 would be the medical marijuana people that
Correct.
are licensed now.
January.
Oh, what'd they say?
July.
Oh, January, sorry.
I think that it was July of this year, but the legislature gave us a little bit of time.
So, and then I thought you said that it'd be 18 months before adult use could get licensed.
Somebody that wanted to do strictly adult use that had never done medical marijuana. So if you are a if you are selling medical marijuana and come January 1st, you automatically get to sell adult use marijuana. That's what the statute currently says. January 1, if you're in good standing with the state and you're in good standing with your locality, you can sell adult use marijuana. And that, you've got 18 months to sell adult use and medical marijuana, or just adult use or just medical marijuana. By the end of the 18 months, you must have the appropriate licensing from the state to sell adult use marijuana, or you no longer get to sell adult use marijuana. So they're giving them time to get the licensing process into place and to let those medical marijuana providers jump through the necessary regulatory hoops. So they're giving them that buffer. No one else but medical marijuana providers for that 18-month monopoly period will be able to sell adult use marijuana.
Okay, thank you. Council, just a reminder of our time here. Councilmember Boyette.
Mayor, we only have one provider of medical marijuana in Billings right now.
I believe that that's the case. There are a lot right outside of city limits.
We have one. So they can sell, January 1st, they could sell recreational.
That is correct.
We still have one business.
That is correct. And we cannot prohibit we cannot prohibit the sale of adult use to a medical marijuana in the same facility.
Right, so we have one business.
Correct.
So do we have 18 months before anyone else can apply for a license, or they have 18 months to obtain the license? How does that work?
They have 18 months to obtain the license, and in the meantime, they can sell it.
Okay. And Mayor, one last question.
Go ahead.
The voters, I thought, of Montana and Yellowstone County and Billings voted for this. Are we, the council, saying, no, you guys can't? We want to put a ballot up and saying, here, we want you to vote against it? I guess that's my concern.
That's the question I had, and I'm not usually fond of exercises in futility. And so I thought the council would kind of jump on board of the no, the die has been cast. But this discussion has made me realize that the level of detail that came out of the new legislation arguably is changed circumstances. The ability to fine tune what types of business, for example, some of those 7 is something I never appreciated. I guess I always assumed it was an all or nothing sort of deal, but it may not be. So I have a greater sympathy for the election option than I guess I did coming into this meeting. I'm sorry, Chris.
Let me just give you some critical dates, because we didn't know what we were going to be doing for the next 60 days with the public safety levy coming up. July 26th required first reading, because August 9th, which is the date I was thinking of, is the second reading of putting something on the ballot. So, the next not the next, we got the 12th. So there's just one council meeting between now and the 26th. That's when a first reading would need to happen to put it on the ballot. And so I would keep it in your discussion as simple as possible. Is it literally to prohibit these certain things? And then I would suggest, no matter what that is, we should be working on regulations for all the things, because you're not going to know until November 2. And then lastly, please, we should be in strong communication at the political level and the staff level with the county. These rules are very intermittent between city and county, including this election question. So I think we shouldn't be doing anything completely solo. We may choose to do something solo, but the county is critical to this.
I agreed, and it would be terribly confusing if each jurisdiction for voters in the city, there were two questions, one from the county and one from the city, and they did not track.
And actually, that was addressed in the statute, that they said you didn't have to ask the same question twice, because they would be able to identify by the data of the votes being cast which were city voters and which were county voters. So you could have one election, but given that the paths that the votes could take, there could be two separate outcomes to one set of questions.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Councilmembers Joy and Brown and Ronnie?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't think I'm going to support the motion. I haven't thought about this enough to really have it well thought out. I'm thinking about, given the numbers, 4,000 people are going to have to change their mind. And that seems like a lot. I know people can change their minds, but that seems like a pretty strong statement of what the voters considered and want. Granted, you can always talk about whether or not the voters had all the possible information when they made their choice, but I'm not going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Okay, a couple of questions. One is, Mr. Boyette mentioned that we had one licensed medical marijuana.
I believe that may be the case.
But the state has many more than that.
Correct.
And those folks can come here and open businesses, correct? We're not limited to who's here in Billings.
I'm not sure about the answer to that. I'm sorry. I don't want to give you the wrong information as to whether or not somebody with a license outside of Billings come January 1st can sell adult use inside. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because there are licensed marijuana in the county here
Correct.
as well.
Correct. You're absolutely right on that.
So the second question then is, the one licensed medical marijuana business that we have here, can they open additional locations?
That would depend on whether or not the state was going to give them a license.
Have to get an additional license
from the state. That may be where they're caught up, is getting that additional license from the state.
Okay, so that'd be statewide then. Nobody's going to just start popping. Okay.
That's the hope. But they still have to clear it with the state. And right now, they are transitioning the regulation of the marijuana businesses over to the Department of Revenue. So that whole process is in quite a flux right now, as you can imagine.
Okay, and then one final question. If we were going to go back to the voters and ask them to repeal, okay, I agree, it was a majority vote that they want marijuana. But I don't think it was a majority vote that they want the growers, the cultivators, on and on and on and on. So if we were to go to ballot, can we just ask about those that may trouble us the most rather than the whole list?
You probably could, but my recommendation would be that you would want to ask them on all of it, because if the voters say no, this council cannot authorize it. And I think that if you're going to ask them on one category, you should probably put them all to the voters.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I lied. One more.
It's an interesting topic. It really is.
Ballot question.
Trust me, I'm used to it. Go ahead. Not just for you.
Ballot question, I mean, that's going to be 6 pages long if we're going through describing, okay, do you want this one? Do you want this one? Yes, no, no, yes. I mean, that's going to be
Well, there would be
right.
There would be a question for each category. Cultivation, yes, no. Dispensary, medical, yes, no.
So we wouldn't be spelling anything out. It'd just be.
I don't recall the I-90 initiative having that level of detail.
Okay.
On my mail-in vote, because we all did it by mail, and I don't remember it being that detailed.
Okay.
Which is another
Thank you.
interesting point.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. It's a complicated subject, so
It is.
we are definitely going to have a lot of questions, and we should be asking these questions now that we've got
Yes.
your attention here. So I just need to have clarification again, because Mike Boyette's question got me a little bit confused again, because I thought I heard you say that our medical marijuana policy right now is problematic and that ordinance needs to be addressed. I thought I heard you say that.
Because we do not, with medical marijuana, we are prohibiting storefront dispensaries right now. That power has been taken out of the statute. However, on the repeal language that came in from the legislature, they were very clear that we could also prohibit any of those 7 categories, including medical marijuana dispensaries. But the voters, by the voters' vote.
By voters, okay. All right, that helps somewhat.
Karen, on the part of the House Bill 70, or whatever the number was, that eliminated our ability to prohibit medical marijuana dispensaries, was the effective date of that approval immediately upon passage, or the traditional fall date, or the January 1 date?
I believe that it's the January 1 date, but I will clarify that. And
So if somebody, if that's a critical question, of course, because if
Right.
somebody applies, we have no obligation to do anything different than we've always done.
right, I believe that that has been pushed back. The repeal date on that has been pushed back to January 1st.
Makes sense, so, okay.
Okay,
Thank
and
you
then
very
one
much.
follow-up to what
And Councilmember Yakovich, you had some?
what Councilmember Brown shared. So Councilmember Brown asked the question about that one storefront, and could they come January 1, operate in multiple locations? Again, I thought you said they had 18, if they're already a medical marijuana provider, then they had 18 months. So they could be selling adult use for 18 months, and they have 18 months to get a state license. So they could operate as of January 1. Is that correct?
At the location that they're at now.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
I just don't know if they can open up multiple storefronts because they are that one licensee of
Gotcha.
medical marijuana.
That makes sense to me. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Yakovich?
Thank you, Honor. Well, I'll speak in favor of this. I think that certainly we want to respect the voters, and we're giving them a chance to reaffirm their vote. It's not like I don't see it as a big deal. We're giving them a chance to be clear. But also, I'm pretty confident most people did not know all these categories when they voted. So, and I really resonate with this secondary impact on neighborhoods. This is a very important issue. We know from the chief of police down that this is going to be impactful in many ways. So I think we should do this wisely and do due diligence and give the voters a chance to look at this and make a clear decision. I mean, if it's unanimously passed, then it is, but we're just giving them that chance. And as the mayor said, again, I'm being redundant, forgive me, but I think all these categories were not part of the voters' mind. And cultivating a bunch of it in a neighborhood is really one of those that I'm sure just is not on people's mind. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Treacy. And then, Council, I would recommend we move to a vote on the motion soon.
I think we need to think about those 7 categories for a second. Cultivation is happening right now in Billings. Manufacturing is happening.
Can you bring this
Oh.
up so I can see the 7?
Sure.
Danny's asking that question. Perfect.
That one medical marijuana provider is doing cultivation, they are doing manufacturing, and they are a medical marijuana dispensary. Obviously, they are not 4 or 5, which are the things that are being enabled by what we're talking about. We don't have a testing lab. I'm not sure why anybody would be upset about a testing lab. So in my mind, the only thing that even becomes possibly a question is the transportation question. So to me, I don't really, I don't see what the confusion would be on this or why we would need to revisit this. We are cultivating, we are manufacturing. Those things are happening right now. And so unless you think that we're going to get 4 or 5 to be reversed in this election, I don't see the point of staff spending any time on trying to put an election, figuring out how to word and manage an election. So no, I don't support this at this point.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there going to be a cost to do this because there's already a ballot going out? Is it minimal, or is it the 75,000 that they always talk about, or anybody have any idea on that?
So Councilmember Ewald, Mayor and Council, I believe the literal direct cost for the election, there shouldn't be much of any additional. Maybe there's an additional charge from the election office, but the rough numbers of $1 a ballot, that's for the election itself. So if there's something incremental, I got to believe it's pretty minor. I think your real cost here is absolutely time. It's your and staff time putting whatever together. So I would encourage you, since you have to adopt it on first reading, whatever it is, it better be pretty simple. Very, very simple, including the discussion we haven't entered into yet. I'm sorry, Mayor, maybe it was after this, which should be even simpler than this one, a lot simpler, local option. If we're going to have this in our community, I would hope all 11 of you would say it's an absolute no-brainer. We want the voters to consider taxing it to help offset some of our cost, because we're going to have cost. Even if I can't quantify them to the dollar that we'd all love to have, I seriously doubt the revenue is going to offset fully the cost. So that's an election question also, I believe.
And also that question regarding the local excise tax can only be initiated by Yellowstone County. So it is really important to work with Yellowstone County, because there is no revenue without them putting it to their voters.
Okay, Council, are you prepared to vote? So is the motion is clear. It is not to approve this, put anything on a ballot, but to instruct staff to go to the next step of figuring out those dates, possible language, exact language, and work with the county to try to clarify what the county is doing, because we want consistency there, and anything else that staff can think of and that council can give staff to think about, and do it all rather quickly. So that's the motion. All in favor of the motion, I guess we better we used to have everybody raise their hand instead of saying aye. So let's just go around. We'll start down here, and Councilmember Shaw.
I'm a nay.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
I don't know. I seriously, this feels so like being pressured for time, and we just got this information.
But once we get it, we don't have to vote on it.
All right, yes, yes.
A reluctant yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Boyette? And Councilmember Brown, you already said aye, and I did not vote, but I am required to. I will vote aye. Maybe I should try to kill this baby, but it wouldn't matter in any event, or kill this baby in the cradle, but it's very early, I guess, to do that at this point. So aye, the motion passes. Staff, you've got work to do. We have not resolved any of those other issues on this. Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor.
That one either.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to follow up with Councilman Shaw that I'd like to direct staff to look at authorizing the legality of having medical marijuana facilities inside the city limits, because that is that correct?
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
I second that.
So to work on specific things to help shore up and correct our medical marijuana ordinances so that if the voters do not prohibit that, we're ready to move forward before year end.
Okay, and Councilmember Ronning had the second, right? Okay, discussion on that motion. Councilmember Denise, I recognize you, and Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you. Actually, I had something else I was going to bring, but I'll ask a question about this to clarify. If I understood this correctly, you said we had to correct our ordinance anyway, so what you're asking for is just the correction of the ordinance on that. Is that what you're asking for? Not to bring an ordinance for medical marijuana in the city, because I thought we were prohibited from it affecting anything within that.
Right now, what we have is a prohibition against storefronts. So we do not have a regulatory structure in place to govern medical marijuana in terms of zoning, licensing, anything of that nature. We could, in lockstep with waiting to hear from the voters, we could develop recommendations for provisions for zoning and licensing that we could go ahead and have ready. Because remember, we want to make sure that if the voters do not prohibit medical marijuana, that we are ready to go with some really good, strong ordinances that we can use and have in place before year end.
So, Mayor, to follow up then, wouldn't we want it not just for medical marijuana, but every single one of these categories? And so shouldn't we amend the motion to say for every one of these categories, not just the medical marijuana?
And my assumption would be that would be the will of the council. You were just prioritizing, I guess, medical marijuana. You weren't intending to exclude the other potential.
Right. I'm just in my mind assuming that medical marijuana is going to go ahead regardless of what happens to the rest of the world. And I want to be prepared for that by having the staff get onto the deal about zoning and where we're going to put people and everything, because I think it's inevitable.
Okay. So at this point, the motion only deals with medical marijuana, but obviously we would need to come back to those other issues on the regulation issue. But right now, it's only that is, or whatever the structure is, yeah. Councilmember Tricky?
So the way I understand what we're talking about in terms of medical marijuana right now, if we do not change the way we are licensing medical marijuana dispensaries in Billings right now, come January 1, there will be only one there will be only one dispensary which is capable, which will be allowed to do either medical or adult or recreational.
If nothing changes, come January 1st, that one medical marijuana provider will be immediately able to move into adult use marijuana.
And the ones that are currently licensed to provide it in the county would not be able to move into the city and provide it.
I believe that would be correct.
That's my read too. So that's why I was going to do something along like what Councilmember Boyette did, because in my mind, if we actually want competition in this area, we need to allow the medical marijuana dispensaries to actually open up in the city limits before January 1st. So I will support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to a vote soon, and then we'll come back to these other categories. Councilmember Ewald?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a substitute motion that it was recommended that we get a committee together to flesh out some of these deals. So I'd like to make a substitute motion that we get the committee working on it and expedite it and bring it back so that we got something to talk about. We could be here all night. So that's my substitute motion, to bring a committee together and get it expedited to bring something back.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion is just to set up the committee. It's not to give the committee any particular instructions concerning prioritization of medical marijuana, but it is to set up the committee and get the committee going. Councilmember, and that was a second, so that is the motions before us now. Councilmember Brown.
Okay, so a timing issue we're kind of discussing over here. For the medical marijuana, we have 18 days to the first reading, right? Come into effect. So a committee's going to get together and do all of these in 18 days. I agree with the committee, but I'm wondering if this one does stand on its own.
Excuse me, can you clarify the 18 days for developing medical marijuana? I know we had 18 days for the election issue, but what's the...
Okay, so the ordinance putting this together, we have until January, correct? For the medical marijuana, to fix that.
We can fix the medical marijuana statute preferably anytime before year end, so that we have good provisions in place. So if the voters say, we're going to approve all of the categories of adult use, all 7 categories, that we have good provisions in place that say, you know what, we're ready to go. You have to be this many feet from a school. You have to be this many feet from a church. Your hours of operation are limited by the state. We could do tighter. So you've got until year end to put in a good structure for medical marijuana. If in the meantime, the voters say, we'll approve all 7 categories, then hopefully this committee can also work on provisions for those all 7 categories.
Okay, that was what I originally thought, and then I got worried here, so.
Okay, so just a reminder, that is the motion. Again, the motion technically is to direct staff to put together that committee, which we have done in the past. We've left it to the discretion of staff to reach out to available council people, and I assume that that's how that would work in this case. So that's the substitute motion. Again, did not include the prioritization of medical marijuana per se, but the regulation of all of the categories was my understanding. Any further discussion on that substitute motion? Councilmember Joy.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Maybe I have, I guess I'm kind of muddled in my thinking at this. Maybe I have a question for the movement. Why is there a thought that the motion could be amended so that medical marijuana is still a priority, but it's still in work with the committee that's formed? I'm not sure. I guess the motion is to eliminate medical marijuana as a priority. Is that the intent of the motion? Thank you.
Councilmember Ewald, if you want to clarify, in a sense, it doesn't matter what the intent is. We could always come back in another motion and add to these other, add to the committee or create a committee or address these other issues. But Councilmember Ewald, if you want to comment.
Okay. It seems like the medical marijuana issue can be fixed anytime between now and December 31st. So that gives us some time. The committee to expedite it, to get it together, to get some ideas fleshed out. We could be here till midnight just talking about this item, and there's so many questions. Nobody's even thought about or brought up the fact that who's going to regulate this in the city, and how are we going to pay for it? Because what I read if you can deem necessary that you need this to regulate it, that you can charge that in a license fee, and you have to be able to substantiate everything. So there's so many questions that it would just take forever, and so hopefully the committee can flesh a lot of these things out and bring it back to us so that we don't have to spend 6 hours asking all these questions. That's the reason for the substitute motion.
Okay, thank you. I'll just comment, and then I think we do need to move on to a vote. We're coming up to break time. My understanding of the committee is that it will have direction from us to do whatever it wants to do, but I would anticipate that it would prioritize medical marijuana. It would also address other regulations for these other categories. And so as long as that's my understanding, I just want to state that. And if Councilmember Shaw is happy, I'm happy. So I will vote
Also
for
my
the
understanding. Thank you.
substitute motion. So any further discussion before we proceed to a vote on the substitute motion? Don't see any. So if you're in favor of the substitute motion, say aye. Aye. If you're opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes. Didn't even have to raise our hands, so I could figure that. I know, a little easier to get clarity there, isn't it? Okay, we're still on this item. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Got to remember to push the button now. So in regard to the 3% option tax that the county can do, I guess I would like to make a motion to direct staff to let the county know that the city of Billings is in support of this so that we can ask them to move forward on that.
Okay, so the motion is communicate favorably to the county. I'm sorry, was it the excise tax or the?
I'm sorry, the sales tax.
The
3% option.
The 3% option tax. Okay,
Yeah.
and a second by Councilmember Boyette. Any discussion on that one? No discussion, except I would recommend to staff that they start developing some detailed analysis of our costs, because that's a necessary part of this. But Chris, you want to comment on that?
So maybe your comment would have it taking a little longer. I'm thinking all 11 of you signing a letter that asks the county commissioners to do something is probably the most powerful way you can ask the county commissioners to do something other than send your staff over to have a conversation with them. And I'm thinking that this one is pretty black and white, right? Whatever the dollar amount is, which we should work to calculate, it's not like you're going to say, oh, I want to go to 2% because we're bringing in too much at 3%. I would think.
And I would agree with that. Again, we're kind of restricted by what we can approve at a work session, so that's why we're putting it in this form. But there's nothing that prohibits us from drafting that kind of letter and just doing it if everybody will sign off on it. So I think that's a great idea. So, but that's not technically part of the motion, I guess. Council members Joy and Ronnie?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My head is just a little bit not quite clear where the council is going, because our first vote is to put this to the voters, and most of the comments have been that the voters were ill-informed when they passed this by the 4,000 votes. So therefore, we want to put it back to them so that they can choose what they want. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are already accomplished, but at the same time, we want to ask for money. Little bit contradictory here. Exactly what do we want? So I will support the motion, but I voted against the first motion, and I think consistency sometimes is an important message that we should make to our voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. So in the past, when we've done committees, like for big things, we've done it right here. So it's been in the public and we've stated who wants to be on that committee. Or is this a committee that Chris is just going to pick and choose and make a call and none of us know who's on that committee until we find out in a weekly? If that's the case, then I'm letting you know right now I want to be on that committee. So just letting you know that. Thank you.
So maybe it would be helpful to give a little bit of the parameters, and I would, no offense to Karen, she won't take any offense to this. Gina starting to get her head better around our rules of procedure. I think the issue is this. You set up the committee.
I'm sorry, Councilor Yakus.
First and then go to the council.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. You're right. We do have that motion, and that point well taken. Absolutely. Any other discussion, though, on the motion to support or direct staff to support that 3% local option by the county? If none, if no other comment, all in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Now, Chris, you were going to comment on the makeup of the committee that has been approved.
So it has to do, I think, with the detail level of your rules of procedures. If you set up the committee, you've got to do a lot of process. Advertising, time limits, notifications. If I set up the committee, I don't have those restrictions. So I think that's why in the past you guys have commonly said, Chris, will you consider setting up a committee to work on a subject? Otherwise, you're contradictory to your rules. And then I would ask that in this, we really, if we're more than 5, if we're 6 or more, we're a council meeting, and we're minutes and all those things, and a lot of work and effort that's added. So respectfully, I would ask that it clarify to me, if you want it to be 6 or more, we can make it 6 or more, or if it's okay to be 5 or less. And then yes, when it's 5 or less, 6 of you aren't on it.
Would it make sense to do 2?
So
medical and recreational?
So that's another option. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Yeah, so when I made the motion, my thought was this would function similar to the Stillwater Building Committee, which I thought that worked pretty well with 1 representative from each ward. So perhaps we can work that out among ourselves with our compatriots and message Chris that, hey, this is, and that way we stay under 5, or we stay under the limit, which I think is important.
And it's always good to keep everybody informed what's going on generally. Councilmember Triki, and then the council, I'd recommend we try to wrap up for our break.
I'm hoping these are 2 yes/no questions. Are these licenses going to be sellable?
No.
Good. And are we tracking what's going on at the federal level? Or we're just, waiting to see?
I have not been tracking what's going on at the federal level. I don't know that there's a lot of movement at the federal level at this time. There's a lot of movement among other states.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just press releases and comments and so far, but they do seem to be coming from both sides of the aisle.
Okay, council, I'm sure we could be here all night. Is there anything else that is critical before we move to our break? And then when we come back from break, American Rescue Plan, there's only $40 to $60 million at stake there, so we ought to be able to get through that in about 10 minutes. Councilor Biakovic.
You're doing a fine job, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay.
As Councilperson Ronning stated and as Councilperson Shaw stated, I think it's very clear if it's with Mr. Kukulski's guidance and direction, each ward decides who's going to represent. If there's a ward that doesn't want to represent, then I would be, if Ms. Shaw is going to be on the committee and I'm not, but if some other ward doesn't want to be on it, I'll be on it. But I think it's pretty simple that way, right? Each ward can give a name to Mr. Kukulski, and if you don't want to be one, then we can find among us as well, but 5 is the number. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me. I'm here.
And I'm
here.
There will be an arm wrestling contest later. Ultimately, I guess it's up to the city administrator and who he wants to make unhappy. Yeah. And there may be some other alternatives as well. Subcommittees, Councilmember Triki's idea is not a bad one either, I suppose. Okay, council, let's take a break. It is 7:30. We'll kind of try to come back, certainly no later than 10 minutes from now. If we're back before then, all the better.
I'll get you introduced.
Welcome back. Thank you, everyone. Councilmember Yakovich, during the break, found some candy that was here when we met last and has been distributing it. He's such a generous guy. We'll take anything we can, though, when it gets desperate. Our next item up is the American Rescue Plan presentation. We have a new presenter. Sarah Lane, welcome. Andy Zeller is on vacation now. So, Chris, would you like to introduce this item and also introduce Sarah?
Absolutely. So Sarah has been with us also since 19. I think it's been about 18 months that Sarah's been on our team. Sarah comes to us.
Oh, yeah, excuse me.
We didn't have public comment for number 1.
Oh, no, we did not. I apologize. Thank you for catching that. Before we get to item number 2, I skipped public comment on item number 1, which is critical on this, of course. So we will open up for public comment on item number 1, presentation on marijuana legislation and medical marijuana ordinance. So if you'd like to comment, please come forward to the podium now and tell us your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Is there anybody present here who would like to comment on item number 1, the marijuana discussion that we've had? Seeing none, we will close public comment period, but thank you for calling that to my mind. Back to item number 2. So Chris,
All right.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So diving in. So Sarah Lane's been with us for about a year and a half. Sarah has lived in Billings since 2015, and she's a graduate of the University of Washington. With a degree in economics and political science. So she's not just, so she helps Andy when he's in his accounting box. She attended MSUB in business administration after moving to Billings, and Sarah has been administering the CARES Act, as well as she'll be overseeing our American Rescue Plan, along with Public Works and the Finance Department. So with that, Sarah's got the first part of this presentation, then Public Works is going to step in for the more specific component, kind of high level as we tried to illustrate in the memo. I mean, this is a lot of money, and this is going to get complex too. I don't think it's quite as complex as what we just talked about, truly. But tonight's goal is not for you to walk away. We don't have to walk out tonight either fully understanding all the components of the American Rescue Plan. We want you to start thinking and understanding the 3 different buckets that Sarah's going to talk about. Direct money that's been appropriated to us or actually deposited in the city's account. Another bucket that's going to be dollars that we're, as I understand it, assured of receiving as long as we spend them in a certain way. But then the third bucket is where we do need you to start thinking short time about. These are the competitive grant applications that the rules were established about 10 days ago, maybe 14, and the applications are due in about 10 days. So that's the piece we have the tight timeline on. The others, we literally have months to be careful to do it well and do it right as to how we determine where to invest the ARPA dollars. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to kind of kick it off.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Okay, wonderful. Well, I think Chris covered it, and I'm done. Just kidding. So I'm going to do very high-level overview. There's lots of moving pieces in this. Like Chris said, there's large chunks of it that we don't need to do anything just yet, and there's still information being released. But there is a portion, and I'm going to leave it to the end so it's fresh in your mind, that you'll need to look over, and then I think the decision needs to be made on the 12th on what we're going to do. It is a super condensed timeline, so we are butting up against the first deadline. It's on the 15th of this month. So I wanted to throw this particular slide in so you understood why we are coming to you right before the deadline.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. I'm
Go
just
ahead, keep your
quiet.
voice up, and that'll help too.
So the timeline, super condensed. It was approved by Congress and signed by President Biden in March. And then money was allocated to the state. The state created their House bill and signed it into law at the end of April. And then Treasury released their interim guidelines, not final, on May 7th, and we received our first federal payment on the 19th. Montana created their commissions to deal with the 2 state grants on the 5th of June. And then we didn't get our actual details so that we could start moving forward, picking what we could use until the 14th. And then because it's a competitive grant, there is a ranking guideline, and that wasn't established until the 28th. So we are here today, right before the deadline, because of that timeline. So basically, I'm gonna make this very simple. There are 3 different buckets that we're gonna talk about tonight, and there are 2 different types. The first is a federal allocation of dollars. So this is money, part of it we have received already. This is money direct from the federal government. They have their own stipulations on what we can use it for. And then there are 2 different state grants. The state grants each have their own descriptions. And so the important thing to note is the federal allocation. We have until December 2024 to obligate it. We have lots of time. We also have many more options on its uses for the federal dollars, whereas the state grants, they are only going to be for infrastructure and only for water and wastewater. So the American Rescue Plan Act, this is the federal funds. We will receive $15.9 million. We have received in payment half of this already, and we will receive the next half in next May 2022. They have given us 5 different categories to use this money on. Like I said, with the federal funds, there's much more of an option. There's broader latitude. The first is revenue loss replacement. A lot of local governments lost money, did not receive the same amount of revenues for different charges, different programs, or even tax income. And it looks at the city as a whole. The second is direct use for infrastructure. This can be water, wastewater, or broadband. We can also spend this money on public health expenditures, so that means COVID mitigation, or if you are going to use it for a vaccine incentive or public health payroll of some sort, we can use it for a few different things under this category. Additionally, we can do economic impact programs that could be whether to an individual or a business. And finally, we can do premium pay for essential workers. There's different guidelines on that. So the first one, the most complicated one, is going to be this revenue loss calculation. The reason we bring this one to you is because you're going to have the most options with this. So according to our calculation, hopefully you can follow me. The federal government assumes that had COVID not happened, we would have grown at a rate of 4.1%. Because COVID happened, we did not grow at that same rate. This is a very particular calculation they give us. They work us through all the details. So according to this calculation, we actually have 7.3 million that we should have received in revenue that we did not. Therefore, we can use part of the 15 million under this revenue loss calculation. Like I said, it takes it as a whole. It doesn't include federal grants, so all that CARES money is not included in this calculation. And this is only the 2020 amount for the calendar year. We can run this calculation for the next 3 years, I believe, 2 years. So if we continue to have the same losses, we can allocate additional amounts out of that 15 million to revenue loss calculation.
I think, Sarah, the only thing I'd add, if you go back to the slide really quick, and you hit it, just trying to keep it simple. Understand, these dollars aren't dollars we're trying to make decisions about tonight or in the upcoming weeks. But when you use the very prescribed calculation formula by the federal government, and that's what you have to use, you don't have options, this is the formula, it essentially is going to allow that the overwhelming majority of the $15 million is going to be within the discretion of the city council to spend on legitimate things of local government. Because this is in essence saying you didn't get that much revenue that you would have gotten otherwise. Whereas these other two buckets we're going to talk about are going to be quite the opposite, quite prescribed. These types of infrastructure are what you can spend the money on, period.
Yeah. So, like he said, there's a benefit to using this option for the federal funds. Not only can you use it for all the individual things that we described before, but you can also use it for these items. You have broad latitude. You can use it for cybersecurity, you can move it over into public safety. You can use it for other infrastructure, including roads. So not only the water and wastewater, but additional, or environmental remediation. And right now, the frequently asked questions are continuing to be put out. So it's becoming more and more broad, the items that we can choose. You should know that we will probably have to come back to this and have an entirely brand new conversation because there's so many different things that we can do with this. Secondly, moving on to the state grants. The first one, it's called the minimum allocation grant. And this is the one that Chris was talking about where it is pretty much definitely ours, as long as we can apply for the projects and they meet the qualifications under the American Rescue Plan. So the amount is 15.6 million. It's based off of the gas tax formula. So the state had 150 million that they divvied up and allocated between the cities and counties. We would receive 15.6 million. The important thing to note about this one is that there's a fund match requirement, and we can do multiple applications, but you either have to do a one-to-one match or let me rephrase that. You have to do a one-to-one match up to 3.9 million as a max. So if you do 4 different applications at 3.9 million each, you're going to have to match at 3.9 million. If you do one big application together, you would only have to match 3.9 million. Does that make sense? Okay, good. And then this application is just now opening up. It has an additional time period. Our final deadline is January 1, 2023, so nothing needs to be done today. And then I'm actually going to give this to Jennifer for the details of the competitive grant, but I want to be realistic about this. I know it says up to 25 million per project, and that would be lovely if we could have a dozen different projects at 25 million. But the state has only allocated for every city and county a total statewide of 248 million. So we might be able to receive 1 or 2. And it is competitive, so we would be up against other cities and counties. So.
And we'll hold our questions until Jennifer's done.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll start by with the what we can use this money for with the competitive state grants. ARPA actually restricts the funding to infrastructure that is eligible under the drinking water and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs. So eligible projects must actually fix deficiencies in the water, wastewater, or stormwater systems. They are not supposed to be for growth projects. So they do, and the NRC has always allowed in SRF the ability to accommodate reasonable growth. We have a couple SRF loans with the city. We've done them for reservoirs in the past where we actually were fixing deficiencies within the system. But we, of course, sized those reservoirs to accommodate future growth, and those are allowed. What's not allowed would be running a water or sewer pipe to a newly served area. That would be considered 100% for growth. So these eligibility guidelines also apply to the minimum allocation grants as well. So we have, like Sarah said, a really quick turnaround on these. The applications are due by July of this month. And it does say for the first round. That is because most likely in 2022, there will be a second round of competitive grants. Still the same 248 million though. So I did ask the state if that was guaranteed, that second round, even if there were $248 million of eligible projects in the first round, and they said probably. So that's our answer. We're probably going to have a second round. The covered period, meaning we can pay for expenses out of these grants retroactive to March 3rd of this year, and we can pay for expenses that are incurred through the end of 2026. They must be obligated, though, by 2024, the end of 2024, basically meaning under contract by that date. The DNRC released the ranking criteria in June for these competitive state grants, and there is a maximum of 600 points available for each project. 420 of those points are directly related to the drinking water and the clean water criteria. The other categories are readiness to proceed at 80 points, affordability at 50, and the match is 50. So unfortunately, we have to be pretty bad at what we do to be too competitive with these grants. In the water portion, which is shown here, we in Billings will get 0 points out of the 180 for that documented health risk category for every project we submit. And that's because, one, we don't have any boil water orders, thankfully, in the last couple of years. And the second one would be because we don't have any violations that we're trying to fix. So 0 points there. We do score some points in the potential health risk category because we are having to fix water main breaks and replacing lead service lines, so we get points there. The compliance category, we should score points for in the reservoir category when we have a couple of reservoirs we'd like to submit for, and those will score points in the compliance measures category. We of course get 0 for the consolidation or creation of a new system, and we will score points in the conservation area. The water meters, that 20 points is a given because we have water meters throughout our entire system, and we will score the energy efficiency points in many of our projects. The wastewater ranking criteria is shown here. It's a little bit easier to earn points on this side. But it's still not great for us as far as competitiveness. But because we do get credit for doing projects that keep the river clean, we can score more points on this side. I did call the DNRC to talk about this ranking criteria to kind of get their thoughts on it to see how we can be competitive in Billings. And what they advised me to do was to include all the ways that we have been proactive in our grant application and include that, and they will take that into consideration. I'm not sure if that translates into points or not, but we will go ahead and put that in there to explain why we don't have the public health measures that we would get points for on the water side. The other thing that they made clear was that their rankings are not the final say in how these grants are allocated. It then goes to the Infrastructure Advisory Commission, and that commission has made it very clear that they want this money spread throughout Montana to all entities that submit eligible applications. That commission consists of 9 people. 6 of those are elected officials. 2 of those elected officials are for Billings. We have Senator Doug Carey and Representative Sue Vinton. So the other criteria are shown on this slide. The further along in a project we are, the more points we get in the readiness to proceed category. The affordability category was a little bit frustrating as well. According to the state, we are just too affordable on our water and wastewater rates. And because our average residential rate is less than 1.1% of the median household income, we get 10 points for that one on all projects. And the city match, that was supposed to come out, what they were going to require on the 28th, but it has not yet. The proposed regulations on that is that we have to submit a match of the lesser of a 1-to-1 match or a 50% of the local ARPA dollars. The local ARPA dollars includes both those first 2 buckets, the federal share and the minimum allocation grants. So in talking to the DNRC, they believe that the final criteria will most likely be a 1-to-1 or a 25% match. We're just going to be on the safe side because we might not know until the last minute or even after we submit, and make sure that they all at least have a 1-to-1 match. So we, in Public Works, scored a variety of projects that were in our CIP against all these categories. And these shown here are the projects that scored the highest. So for the water side, it's the West End Plant and West End Distribution projects, the 2021 and 2022 water pipe replacement projects, Staples Reservoir reconstruction, water storage improvements in Zone 1, and the Zone 6 reservoir and redundant line. The sole wastewater project there is the influent lift station. And our reasoning for only submitting one wastewater project is pretty simple, in that we really need water money. So we were focusing on the water side. Not sure if you know yet, but we did not receive the $50 million BRIC grant for the West End project. We are concerned about the costs of that project exceeding the budget, so we would rather submit for more of the water funds. So tonight we're really looking for feedback primarily on this competitive state grant component. And then next Monday, council will be asked to authorize the staff to apply for the state competitive grants. Staff will then have 3 days in which to submit all of the applications. And then, like I said, the DNRC will rank those and forward them to the commission. The DNRC is going to take a month to do so, and I believe the commission already has a meeting set up to get on it pretty quickly. The commission will then send it to the governor, and the governor is the final say in it. The next 2 steps for council, of course, are the other 2 buckets of money. The minimum allocation grant applications, we really could do any time, but we want to see what the results of the competitive grants are first before proceeding with that. And then you will receive a future presentation once all the details of the federal money is worked out to prioritize those funds as well. So I will turn it over to you for council, or to mayor and council for questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Council questions for Sarah or for Jennifer. Jennifer, I'm just going to ask you 2 quick questions. Can you explain why you get points for having more expensive services and you're penalized for, and the category is affordability? When the more affordable you are, the worse you come out. I mean, I just don't understand the logic behind that. And the second allocation, if those dollars aren't all used up, is there any chance that they would come after the next legislative session when some of this might have been fixed, or there might be some legislative fixes? So affordability and timing on the second tranche.
Mayor and council, To answer the first question, my belief as to their logic behind it is those communities who already have high rates for water and wastewater cannot really afford to pass on more rate increases to their own customers, so they would be more likely to need this grant money than we do apparently in Billings who have low rates. For your second part of the question, anyone that does not submit for the minimum allocation grant, those dollars automatically go to the competitive state grant program after that deadline is up. If you don't submit by then, they fall into the competitive state grant program. I mean, we're submitting, or, you know, it's up to council, but we'd like to submit for $3 million here, just out of Billings. I cannot believe that there will be any dollars left over, and that $248 million that we have for that program is capped. It won't increase in the next legislative session.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Sarah or Jennifer? Council members Tricky and Ryan?
I'm trying to see if I understand the, I forget which one it was, the federal local thing. So what they're basically saying is that we can get up to $15.9 million over 3 years, and that in the first year we are qualifying for $7.4 million?
So, kind of, there's two different things. We will definitely receive 15.9 million, and we can use it within those 5 different categories. The 7.9 million that I was showing you in the prior slide, that is specific to the revenue loss calculation. So that's the calculation where they assume that we were going to have this rate of growth, et cetera. And the reason why you would choose that one is because you have more options to use it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Ronnie?
Thank you. Great presentation by both of you, again, on a complicated subject. So I'll ask you first, Sarah, and then I have a question for Jennifer, too. So on the slide that shows the eligible uses for revenue loss funds, if I understood correctly, yep, thank you. If I understood correctly, you're probably going to come back to us, you or Andy will probably come back to us with more clarification on this. But under public safety, do you know if those funds could be used for something like deferred maintenance for our fire stations? Or does it have to be
I will say
really
that you have
clearly tied into COVID?
You have pretty broad latitude on what you can use it for, and these are the categories that they put out there, and the frequently asked questions are indeed growing. I would like to do a bit more research before I say yes.
Absolutely. Yep, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh.
The other piece, if I could just add to it, is the way we intend to approach this with you and the public is, frankly, to make this an integral part of the capital improvement plan this fall. So, you know, that process will have an added component, which is these dollars, these ARPA dollars, and how they can be spent. And I think that's the best process that gives the staff a full opportunity to, you know, figure out what to recommend, and you ultimately to have several meetings, not just one, to ultimately hash some of that out and then ultimately adopt a plan, understanding what we would be applying for, what we'd be applying the dollars to. And from a time perspective, as Sarah said, we're not, I don't think that's too slow or too fast. I mean, literally, we're talking about in the upcoming months, the staff has already started the process for updating the CIP for your adoption late this fall.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question was for Jennifer. If I'm understanding correctly, Jennifer, the staff has really put some due diligence into this, and so tonight you're just looking for us to give you direction to say yes to all of those, the different slides, the slide that you had that had all of the different possible things that you would be applying for. are you wanting us to say yes to all of those things and you apply for all of those things? Are you wanting us to say yay or no to any of the specific things? Can you just clarify that for me? Thanks.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Ronning, on the 12th, you'll be officially asked whether you are okay with us applying for these grants. But tonight, because we obviously have to gather a lot of the information for the applications ahead of time, if you have any desires of we don't want to see you submit grants for any of these, please let us know.
So all again, or would you want us to say yes or no tonight to some of them? Just giving you direction.
Just general direction tonight. If you have any that you would like to see pulled out, let us know.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, and on that, I'll just kind of point out, if you add up, well, the West End plan, of course, is a big one. Jennifer, if you add all of them in the application amounts, what that adds up with, do you know off the top of your head what the total ask would be? And while you're going to comment on that, I'll just do the quick math that if we start with 248 million, and with Billings having about, or Yellowstone, about 10% of our state's population, 10% of that 248 million would be about 24.8 million if it were done purely based on population. We would be doing very well if we got $24 million out of this, but can you comment on what all those add up to?
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. It's $42.3 million is what we would like to submit for. And as you did the same type of math to get to see where I thought we might end up, and we would be doing well, I think, at the 24 million.
Very well, given the pessimistic tone of this presentation. Okay, other questions, Council Member Ewald and Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Good presentation, Jennifer. A little pessimistic, like, wow. But can we get points for the fact that our water plant that we have now and the amount of time we have, if something went wrong because there's very little redundancy in it, that we really need the money to get this West End plant, or we'll have 110,000 people showering with water bottles?
Mayor, Councilmember Ewalt, we are hoping to score higher than the 170 that we show that we, when we score it straight against their criteria, we score 170 points. But we will do as they advised and put in all the reasons for the plant, put in what we've done to be proactive in here, how many this would affect as far as population, and I'm hoping they will see differently than that 170. And like I said before, we do have higher hope just because the rankings don't determine it all. It still goes to the commission, and the commission will distribute that money.
Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. I recognized Councilor Tricky before, so Councilor Tricky and Councilor Bernice.
No problem. In all of those dollars floating around, is there an opportunity for us to build out cell towers?
I'll let Sarah answer.
Or incentivize someone to build out cell towers?
So probably your best bet would be to, I believe, I want to research this, like I said, but I think that your best bet would be to do it through the revenue loss calculation, because you have pretty broad latitude on how to use it, and it can go towards public safety. I'm not aware of a restriction, but I would be happy to look into that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. By the way, thank you for giving the presentation to us beforehand. It was helpful to kind of look through us and look it over first. And so, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you this question, if you don't mind, because as I look through this, the three different buckets, it looks like your deadline is first, and that's why you've got these projects identified. And we're seeing the ones that you're looking at, but we've heard about different projects, like up in the by the airport where the water line is only 4 inches, they need a 12-inch line, so that's got to be replaced. There's no redundancy in lots of different areas of water throughout different areas. So there are issues up there in the Heights area, but I don't see any water or sewer projects on here. I think the Reberg Ranch, they talked about how that's not going to be sustainable to be out there. It needs to be connected to the sewer system somehow. Is there a reason why, or did you look at those projects and they just didn't score well, or?
So Mayor, Councilmember Neese, we have a number of projects in the CIP, as you know. Some of them scored as well as these, none of them scored more. And so if you notice the dollar amount of the projects, we went for the larger dollar items that we have in our CIP right now. Just because it takes an insane amount of time to submit each grant application, we're going for more dollar per minute, I guess, of staff time. But keep in mind, water money is water money, right? If we get this money for these projects, it frees up money over here for other water projects.
Okay, Mayor, follow up on that, please. So if let's say we get some of these done, the round 2, you could apply for other projects. Let's say all these are approved. I'm being optimistic. Okay, so you could apply for additional projects in round 2, is that correct?
Councilmember Neese, correct. The plant you'll see is in this one. We did not put the reservoir in because we're hoping to wait for round 2 for that. We will be further along in the process, possibly get more points on that one. So we are hoping to still submit more in round 2.
Okay, Mayor, if you mind, one more question? Sure. For instance, the West End plant, 72 million. Is there any way to break that up into 2 projects to where you can actually extend that a little further? I don't know if that's possible or not, but is that just the plan itself, the one project, or is that like the north part, the lake, south lake? Or is that just the plan?
Mayor, Councilmember Neese, that is just the plant itself. We also have the intake. The intake scored about the same, so we're doing the plant instead.
You're breaking it up as much as you can. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? And I guess are you looking for a motion, or if we do not change, this is what we'll see at the business meeting, I guess is the default, right?
Yes, so in fact, you already have your packet for next week, so our speculation and its starting point was these projects. Certainly to Councilman Rowning's question and others, if you think we missed something that we should have included, or you want something taken out, that'd be the value in the discussion tonight. It's not too late next Monday. That's when you'll actually adopt the resolution. And it's on consent right now if they all make sense to you. It can be pulled off of consent, but that's how quickly we needed to meet the time frame, is to get to your work session and next Monday get you to approve a resolution. And it wouldn't be too late if you wanted to change something next Monday. We'd appreciate it if you know it tonight, because it'll just help us set up for that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Barring that, then we've got it in the packet. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll ask Jennifer another question here regarding this and others that you may have looked at. If there was one more that you would add, which one would it be?
Hard to say off my head here, but as far as what I remember from points, I believe I would add the intake into it, just because it is another high dollar project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, are we ready to move on to public comment on this item? Let's do that. Doesn't necessarily foreclose further discussion. This is the opportunity. If you'd like to comment on item number 2, the presentation on the American Rescue Plan proposals, please come forward. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front, please.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I just wanted to congratulate and extend my gratitude to Debbie and Jennifer and the Public Works staff for offering such great services at such low rates. It is truly a first world problem to be disappointed that we can't get grants because we get too much and we pay too little for it.
Yeah.
I look forward to the day that our police department can't get grants because our crime rate is too low, and our parks and trails can't get grants because they're all built out and well programmed. So again, thank you.
It is, yeah, Tom Rupsis, I don't know what your address, but.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I say? Yeah, Tom Rupsis, 105 Billings.
Okay. Yeah, it is ironic. Any further public comment on this item? Any other public comment? Seeing none, public comment period is then closed. Council, any further discussion before we move on to item number 3? I'm not seeing any. Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, do you know when we'll start seeing projects for the minimum allocation grant? As far as, will that be coming to us at some time or another?
Certainly. So you're talking about that second bucket?
Bucket, yes.
Absolutely, they will come to you for certain. I don't know the exact timeline. If anything would be coming before the capital improvement plan. I'm not certain anything will come before the CIP. Recognize you'll start seeing the CIP October, November, and to adopt November, December. I don't know if there's any public works project. I mean, they're primarily infrastructure projects, so they're.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, we have a number of projects that we could submit. We are really just waiting to see what the results of the competitive state grant program is first. So as soon as we know that, which is hopefully in just 2 or 3 months, we can come back to you with that program as well.
Mayor, quick follow-up then. Go ahead. So I understand you're waiting because of some of this, but is there any concern about the deadline? Like, for instance, now we just got this information. We, as a council, didn't really have a whole lot of, in fact, any input into what projects were selected until they're here. And now you say, well, if you want to add some, go ahead. But we don't know what all the projects are. We haven't done the research and study. We weren't on the committees to talk about these. So as you, is there any reason why we can't get to these projects maybe even earlier before the CIP, so we can even add them to the CIP, so that we can start planning ahead of time, and so the council can be more involved in some of these projects to kind of be a part of that decision, what projects are going to be put on the list?
You know, my first crack at that would be that certainly we could, but frankly, I don't anticipate we're going to have the information before the CIP process. And what I hear you asking for to make the CIP process more effective in this kind of a dialogue is don't just show us the projects that meet the, you know, if we have $42 million to spend, I want to see $60 million of projects. Because I want to know what the last projects were that got cut to not make the cut or didn't make the cut, so you can be more engaged in the conversation if I'd raise this one and lower that one. But I still am thinking the CIP process is the most thorough way to do that for both the public, for the staff, and for the council before any final decisions are made to apply for anything. And again, recognize we got a pretty good set of deadlines out there, and their way out there is to allocation of money and then spending of those dollars. Anything you'd add, Jennifer, please?
The only thing I would add is on this competitive grant side of things, you get more points if your project is already in a plan. So we didn't pick anything that was outside of the CIP or outside of master planning that we've already done. It's just off that list. So obviously we can prioritize better when depending on what we get here, when we go into the CIP process. And then on that minimum allocation grant, it does not have to have that criteria. We could say, well, we didn't have the funds for this. We could spend this 1.5 million over here on that type of project because there isn't the same criteria.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Briol.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, the intake and the pipe to supply for the reservoirs, how much is that estimated at?
Councilmember Ewald, it's 21 or 22 million.
Okay, so if I'm on that committee, I'm going, why would I approve for a water plant when they don't have any way to get the water there? So would it be smart to actually include that and maybe drop 1 or 2 of the other ones off? Because if you build a plant and you don't have a way to get the water there, the plant's not going to do any good.
Mayor, Councilmember Ewalt, it can certainly be added. We picked a variety of projects, some that have lead services in it, some, that have, because both of those rehab projects have lead service replacements, as well as, we're fixing breaks. And then we have the reservoirs, we have the plant. We're just trying, we don't know what's going to appeal to this commission. So we could add the intake in as well, as that might be a more appealing project too.
Thank you, Jennifer. And although I suppose there's always the issue whether they would see that as one project, and we still have a $25 million cap per project. So if they saw that as part of same, we wouldn't get any additional dollars. But last question, Council, I do think we need to move on. It's getting late. But just a quick one. Do we know whether the county has applied for any dollars related to repairs of the BBWA on behalf of the ditch company, since political jurisdictions are allowed to make applications for other entities? They have, or they're in the process of?
County approved a letter today.
They did, okay.
So Mayor, Council, that's consistent with a request I had to Casey to see were they going to apply, and what I took from his response is that they are working to make application, but I don't have any assurance of that or haven't had any conversation since that email exchange last week.
Okay, great, thank you. Then Council, let's continue to item number 3, the Mitchell Development Compensation Agreement. Debbie Melling is our presenter on this.
As Debbie's getting set up, I'll just kind of set the conversation up a bit. On both these next two conversations, we really is to get some feedback from the council as to your interest, support level for the projects. We're trying to avoid scenarios where either the developer or the staff is going down a path in the dialogue between us that's inconsistent with what the council's thinking. Now, in this case, you've already adopted a budget that includes the $3.2 million to get the utilities to it. So we do know, I mean, that's about as intent as you could possibly be. You budgeted for, actually, both of these projects are in the budget. So with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie. The timeline processes tonight, again, you can't take any formal action. We're just, both the developer and the staff want to get a sense of where are we at here? Are we on the right path, or are we not on the right track?
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council, for letting us speak about this tonight. So this is a utility compensation agreement. Usually you would not see these outside of a subdivision or an annexation. In this particular case, the developer wants to make sure that we're on solid ground kind of with the whole plan. So that's why we're doing the compensation agreement before the rest of it. And we'll kind of go into what the rest of it is when I get to that point. So the property that we're looking at is west of Alkali Creek, south of the planned inner belt loop. So you can see the inner belt loop there on the left side. Everything south of there to where the existing county developments are is this property that we're talking about this evening. Our water system is along Wicks Lane. There you can see on the top side of the screen, and then on the south, it goes to about Strawberry. So that's where the existing city limits stop now, and that's where our water system stops. Our sanitary sewer is very close to the same location. It's in green. So if this project goes forward with the city building a portion of it and the development building a portion, it would take sewer all the way up to the corner of Skyway Drive and Alkali Creek, and it would take water to that point as well. The city's portion would be the $3.2 million that we've talked about. That's everything from the end of the existing system now through the county development. So that's land that probably is not going to use water or sewer in the near future. And it gets it to the edge of the developable property, which is another 3,700 feet of water and sewer, and it would front that entire development. So the benefit of doing this now is that at some point, it gives us the ability to make the loop for Skyway Drive. Right now, this is a really long single feed. If we are able to make this looped connection, that gives us 2 ways to serve the area. So if there's ever an issue on either of those lines, you have the ability to serve all the property from another direction, which is a good redundancy to have in your system. The other benefit it gives us is that we are ready to start building the utilities on the Inner Belt Loop. If we don't make these connections now, make this extension now, we are going to have another 1.5 miles to run these lines when we're ready to do it. So if the development is going to go now, we're proposing that the city do this portion of it so that we don't end up with a large gap of county development. So the compensation agreement, the oversizing of water and sewer mains is part of our sewer rules, water and sewer rules and regs. You've seen these compensation agreements quite often. And basically anything over a 12-inch diameter pipe is paid back to the developer when they install those lines. The water line in this case is only a 12-inch, so there's no compensation on the water. The sewer, we're looking at a 15-inch, so somewhere under 200,000. We don't have that figured out yet, what that would be, but it's on the order of just under 200,000. The city contribution portion is the 3.2 million that's requested from the developer. That 3.2 million is in the budget. Well, it's at 3.15. But it's broken down by water and sewer, as you can see there. And we have the potential for reimbursement on that. Both the developer and the city of Billings, all that portion of water and sewer that's installed, if anyone else connects, we will get paid back for that portion of facilities that we put in. As I said, the compensation would come from the fiscal year 22 budget. We have 3.155 million in for the 3.2 million portion, and 600,000 is set aside every year, 300,000 from water and 300,000 from sewer for this type of agreement. I said that we have budget remaining in 21. We only used 50,000 water and about 110,000 sewer last year. So we do have money that we can roll into this year as well. And the 23 budget, the reason I put that, oftentimes we have compensation agreements over 300,000. When we do that, developers have to wait their turn to get paid back. In some cases, it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road. We haven't seen that for a while, but that's the way the compensation agreement process works. So as I said, the compensation agreement is what we're talking about now, which is just for the water and sewer. This is predicated on the fact that they would annex. So annexation would be the next piece that would come in, and we'd have a development agreement that lays out the rest of the development requirements. Then a subdivision with that would be a subdivision improvement agreement. Again, some of the infrastructure that's required there, including the utility extensions. And then construction could occur at that point. So like I said, we're a little out of order on this one, but it's unique, so we wanted to make sure to bring it early and make sure that we had the support for this. David Mitchell, the developer, is here tonight if there's any questions for him as well.
Thank you very much. Questions for Debbie or there's a guy in the far back with a beard that looks a little bit like David Mitchell, but it's hard to believe that could be him, but I guess a COVID beard. Council members Joy and Treaky.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have 2 questions. When will we actually see an increase in order to pay for this extension? What year will we see the property value increases to the city where this actual expense will be paid back?
So there's a couple of different ways that this comes out of water funding and sewer funding. And so the way that we would be collecting for that is either through reimbursement. If anybody else connects to our portion that we paid for, we would get reimbursed for that amount. Or when development occurs, system development fees are paid, which buys into the system that is already in place. So I think they're planning development within the next year to 2 years. Is that safe? So it's a relatively short-term plan.
Mayor, I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Will the money that's being used for this create any deferred maintenance? Thank you.
So with everything that's in the budget, we have to make decisions on which ones are more important, which ones we think have the best use of our funds. In this particular case, we think the benefit to being able to connect the Skyway Drive Loop and extend the facilities on the Innerbelt Loop are more important than some of those maintenance projects. I don't think, and maybe I'll look at Jennifer if there's anything, oh, she left. Thanks, Jennifer, as I am turned this way.
Been abandoned.
Yeah, she's fast. We'll talk tomorrow. So we just, when we go through with the capital projects and then we go through with the budget, we rank basically the priorities of the projects that we have out there. So I think in our minds, this took precedence.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky, and then Councilmember Neese.
I've never seen a compensation agreement before, so I just kind of want to make sure I understand what we're going to be approving when this comes to be approved. So we're not approving the actual project itself, we're approving the additional funds that we would be giving to the developer for making the pipes bigger?
So there's two different parts to this. Yes, to that. Everything over a 12-inch, we would compensate them for that. And we see that as infrastructure for the remainder of the community, not for that development. So anything over the 12-inch, yes. The 3.2 million is a little bit different, and that's why we've brought it. We've done this in a few places. Ironwood, Briarwood, I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. But we've done this several times where we think it's important enough to extend city facilities to bring a development into the city. It's unique. We've only done it a few times. And then as far as a compensation agreement, usually they're tied with the subdivision. So that's where you normally would see it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, I like what I see here, especially because it's like you say, the loop coming around. If this development wasn't happening, what is the benefit to the city with having that loop there? And it looks like you're only doing water loop. Would you not do sewer loop as well?
No, we would just do a water loop. Sanitary sewer works a little bit different. We would have to actually boost that up because of the grade difference. So having that gravity line, we don't take sewer lines down as often as we do for water. Connections can be made under service and that sort of thing. So it's not quite as important to have those loop systems in sanitary sewer. So the first part of the question.
There was, what kind of benefit is that going to be able to have that loop there? And I'm assuming if it's 3.2 million to go that direction and you're only doing the water, then it's going to be quite a bit less to get the water line through there. Is that right?
Right. So I had a slide that broke that down. I believe it was 1.2 million for water, 1.2 million for water for that piece, and then the development would pay for the other 3,700 feet. So our system is based on looping. I mean, it's just building a system around redundancy and having those multiple ways to feed every property is really important in a water system. We have very few dead-end lines. They're hard to manage. And it's not the level of service that we want to provide in our system. So over time, we would try to get this loop in, even without this project.
Mayor, another follow-up, please. Go ahead. Does this line that comes up through Alkali Creek, is there any plans or does it go up to the airport now?
I would have to pull up the GIS so we could see exactly where these lines go.
Okay.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's a long single feed. I think it goes all the way back to Governor's before there's another water line.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Boyette and Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Could the developer come forward as long as you're here? Thank you, sir. They keep talking about a development. What's a development? What is that going to be?
David Mitchell, 1655 Valley Heights, 59105, residential subdivision.
Okay, like one house, 5 houses?
Anywhere from 250 to maybe 400 at the very end.
More questions, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Are these starter homes, nice homes, middle homes? What kind of development are you going to build?
Varied, there'll be smaller townhomes, patio homes in one section of the development. Another one will be a little bit larger, single-family residence, 15 to 20,000 square feet. There will be larger tracts, an acre acre and a half for larger single-family residents. So
And
it will vary.
then finally, if we don't approve this, what's your options?
Go back to the drawing board. If this isn't approved, a couple things. This is showing the 3.2, just so we're all clear, does not cover all the way to the here. It just covers to the property that we're up to our property. Can I go point up here?
I'll show it actually.
Okay.
I think I've got it. There you go.
So correct me if I'm wrong with our discussions, but it would go to our property line, which is about right here. And then, so that's what the 3.2 million covers, correct?
Yeah.
And then the rest is in front of our property line. Now, one discussion we had, which I didn't hear yet, but would be in the event that on the north side of it, there is no potential use or anybody to tap in on the north side of that. So there is the discussion of running the trunk line through our subdivision because and for us, we'd have to make one loop of the water and sewer through our subdivision and then do another loop on Alkali Creek Road. And if that had to happen, we wouldn't be able to do the subdivision. Yep.
Any other questions? Councilman Brown?
Thank you. And this is more for Debbie, but you could answer it probably too. I know there's been a lot of discussion. This has kind of gone back and forth, but we are looking at full annexation now, right? Not right to refusal and all this other mumbo jumbo.
So one of the conditions of this would be annexation. I mean, in order to do, and back to Councilmember Chiriki's question, all you're approving tonight is if this is ever approved and if water lines and sewer lines are extended, then we would compensate. There's still an annexation, there's still a subdivision, all of that has to be approved by you.
Okay, and this is already in the budget?
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Debbie or the developer before we go to public comment? Don't see any, so let's open this up for public comment. If anybody would like to comment on item number 3 that we've been discussing, please do so. Tell us your name and your address, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Krieger. I live at 1100 Evergreen Drive up in the Heights, and I'm also a real estate broker in Billings. And as you all know, we have an extreme shortage of homes there, right now. It's been crazy the last 2 years. Especially since COVID hit, we have a tremendous amount of people that are moving into our community. Houses are increasing tremendously. Houses under 400,000 are selling in one day with multiple offers, and there is an extreme shortage of affordable housing in Billings. But so I am really for annexing this land into the city and helping to develop it, because even if those homes are $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $1 million homes, what it'll do, it'll allow members of our community to move up into those homes and open up their homes to other individuals in town. So we do need that, because across the board there aren't homes in any category or any price. It's very limited. One small thing that I'd like you to consider, however, when you're annexing that land into the city, or if you decide to do that, to also consider that there are many roads along Alkali Creek that are in the city limits that are not paved. They don't have curbs, they don't have sidewalks, they don't have proper wastewater runs everywhere. So that might be something to also consider for the future, is finishing off those areas. There's also many homes along Alkali Creek that are still sewer, or they're still septics, they're still wells. So we have a little bit of hodgepodge kind of development in that area. But yeah, I'm just for really considering annexing that in, because it's a beautiful area and there'd be beautiful neighborhoods over there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on item number 3? Don't see any, so we'll close public comment period on that item. Council, are you ready to move on to item number 4? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, I have a question for you regarding that area, but that's all right. You don't have to put that map. You had the water and sewer there, but is there any plan for the stormwater through that area? I mean, is that something that the developer is going to have to do? Or are we going to be looking at that down the road then? And why aren't we planning that now?
Storm drainage is a long ways away in this area. And the way storm drainage works now, on site for development, they have to detain a lot of the stormwater on site. So the way subdivisions build now is really different than they used to build. There are possible locations along Alkali Creek for discharge. They don't necessarily need a pipe. There's other ways that they can get that water out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Yakowicz.
Well, just real quick, I think it's a real win having sewer and water up there versus having septic tanks. And then 10, 15 years from now, having to go back into sewer. So I think it's foresighted, and especially for you, Ms. Melling, thank you for working hard on this. I know it's taken a lot of your time.
Debbie, question, Alkali Creek is major arterial. I'm assuming that as part of any construction, there'll be trail requirement on whichever side. Is that true?
Our arterial standard requires a trail on one side, yes. And that'll happen during the annexation and development agreement, and then the subdivision with the subdivision improvement agreement.
Okay. Very good, thank you. And presumably that would then be on that west side or the developer side?
Typically, that's what we would require, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions before we move on to item number 4? Don't see any. Thank you very much. That concludes item number 3. We'll move to item number 4. Is there a Debbie Melling in the house that can walk us through somewhat similar presentation?
Very similar, different location, different type of development, but very similar conversation. So again, we're looking at a compensation agreement that's a little bit out of order. Normally you would see this further down the line after annexation and subdivision. This particular one is a site plan, so there won't be a subdivision, but there would be an annexation and conversation then. But little out of the normal process. The developer is here, and Allison with Big Sky Economic Development is here as well. They want to talk more generally about the project itself. So I will discuss what the compensation would entail, and then they're going to talk a little bit more about the impact to the project would have on our city and that sort of thing. So I'll be pretty general when I talk about the development, and then they'll fill in the blanks. So very similar. This is the subject property here, just south of the frontage road and west of Harnish Boulevard. Our existing water and our existing sewer is on both sides of the interstate, very close to where the Annafeld subdivision is located. And our water line is, again, one on the north side of the interstate, and then to Elysian School there at the corner of East Lane and Elysian. So the extensions would be, as shown here, from the end of our system over to the subject property. And some of the benefit we would derive from this is that we would have the ability to connect that water main loop, again, very similar to what I talked about in the last development. We want to loop this end of the system. We have a lot of houses on a dead-end system going out to Annafeld, and that whole area out there is a single feed system. So the ability to make this connection is really important to us. This gets us closer. So the other benefit is the vacant property that has the ability to develop. There are obviously a lot of properties out here that are in the county. They could also eventually annex and come in for water and sewer, but for now, we're really looking at some of those vacant properties that this opens up development for. Again, the compensation agreement that we're talking about tonight would have oversizing as defined in our water and sewer rules and regs. Anything over a 12-inch would have compensation. The water, we are looking at a 16-inch, so just under $40,000, and the sewer, we're looking at 18-inch, so about $140,000 there. These are based on actual costs, so we show estimates here, and then whatever the cost is, that's what we actually pay. The other piece of this is a city contribution, looking at $250,000 requested from the city, and then Big Sky Economic Development is considering another $250,000, and Allison will talk about that a little bit later. Potential for reimbursement, as you saw in that last picture, there's quite a bit of property in there that could potentially develop over the next 10 years. If that's the case, that reimbursement agreement would basically pay the developer, us, and Big Sky Economic back for a proportionate share of what we put into this. The compensation itself is budgeted. Again, that $600,000 we put in every year. We have for FY22. If you've added up the last two, you can see we're a little bit over on this. So we do have remaining budget from FY21, as well as the potential to just pay back next year with the funds that we get annually. So next step, we're looking at a compensation agreement coming to you, basically this compensation agreement. And then also this summer, amending the annexation map. And annexation in the fall. This is all very procedurally scheduled. And then I put on here the tax abatement. I don't have a lot of information about that, but we want to show the whole project tonight, everything that the city is going to see eventually. And so the tax abatement would probably follow along with that annexation, and then potential for building in winter, first quarter of 22. So moving pretty fast on this one. And like I said, we've got Allison Corbin from the Big Sky Economic Development and Joe Easton from Messenger Company, and they're both going to talk a little bit more about the project itself. And I'll just leave the pictures so that they have something to...
It's fun to be back in person. Hello. Allison Corbin, 2910 Joan Lane, Billings. And I'm here to just give an overview of this project and the work we've been doing over the last 2 years and the value that this really brings to the city. So to start out, I think you've heard us beat this drum, especially my boss, Steve, about the importance of shovel-ready properties in this community to meet industry needs, to make sure that we can accommodate growth and development in a way that works for the business, but also for the city. And this is an excellent example of partnership coming together between our organization and the city and a private industry to find a solution that makes it so we gain even more developable space in our community. So I think that's a huge win off the top. If we're to get these extensions, we gain an additional 95 acres that are just land today, as well as many businesses that will have easier access to infrastructure needs. So I think this is a critical step. So time machine, 2 years ago, we started talking with Coca-Cola, the messenger company. It's also called High Country, which is the franchisee for this area for Coca-Cola, talking about the opportunity to create a new warehousing space for their business. They're already here in Billings on First Avenue South. But the second part of that opportunity was creating a manufacturing facility. And of course, when you say manufacturing and in the land of economic development, you get excited, right? Because that's tax base and that's jobs. So this business is looking at growing, creating 50 new jobs in our community that are really high paying. Just based on the job creation alone, that's a nearly $25 million economic impact annually on our community. So that's very significant. And that's before you even consider the investment of the facility and equipment associated with it, which also grows our tax base. So we think that's really critical and a really exciting project in our community. As Debbie mentioned or alluded to, our organization sees this as very critical, and we're stepping forward to that end to contribute $250,000 of our opportunity fund toward these infrastructure extensions. And that will be, that was passed through our opportunity fund committee and will be voted on at our executive committee tomorrow and our board meeting on Thursday. So that's why it's just pending, but we think there's a lot of buy-in on that because it meets expectations we have around job creation and closing a gap to make it so private investment can be made in our community. As Debbie also mentioned, Coca-Cola coming together for this project between the city's contribution, ours, as well as Coca-Cola's and a future tax abatement are all around and to the end of making sure they want to manufacture here in Billings. Because there was conversations about if it can't work here or if we can't get the infrastructure we need, then it can go elsewhere. So it's all about making sure this investment happens here in our community. And so I am very happy to introduce you to Joe Easton. He's the Director for Property Development and Facilities for High Country / Messenger / Coca-Cola. So I'll let Joe take over from here. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Joe Easton. I'm Director of Property Development for Coca-Cola High Country, and our company is headquartered in Rapid City, but I live and work in Missoula, so I'm familiar with Billings, and we wouldn't even be to this early point without the skill and leadership of Chris and Debbie and Wyeth, so thank you for your help and contribution, but of course the leadership of this has been Big Sky Economic Development and Steve and Allison. So I know it's been a long night and very busy for you, so I want to be quickly about the scope and scale of our project as we foresee it right now. On the yellow shaded parcel right now is about 10.5 acres in the main piece and then 3 1-acre pieces. We foresee right now 110,000 feet of distribution space and about 30,000 feet of manufacturing. We see bottle and can production. Right now within our system, the closest manufacturing is in our system in Bismarck. And so other trucks come every day from Denver and Bellevue. So a large trucking effort, a large product distribution effort to bring product to Billings and across the entire system. And very quickly about Messenger Company and Coca-Cola High Country. Messenger, our current CEO is Trevor Messenger, is a third-generation owner of this distributorship based in Rapid City and distribute Coca-Cola and 450 different varieties of soft drinks and beverages throughout Montana, northern Wyoming, western North and South Dakota. So it's been an established business and a family-owned business, and we are looking at expanding our presence and footprint in Billings with support and guidance from City Council and Mayor, and of course, administration and Big Sky Economic Development. So I'd prefer to answer your questions. I'm sure there have some gaps that I haven't brought forward, but we'll be available to you whatever we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from staff before we open up for questions? Okay, well, thank you. I'll just start with a question for Joe. Potentially welcome to the community.
Thank you. No, we are here. We are going to be here.
Yeah, and there's another company in town. It tends to be Blue. They like Blue, and they've been great corporate citizens for almost 100 years in our community. And of course, it doesn't really have anything to do with this land use issues before us. But I'm hoping that you would take a page from their music book and sing similarly. You want to just comment on that topic?
Certainly, thank you. Messenger Company and has been in communities such as Billings their entire formation since Rapid City. We understand the long history that our competitors in Blue have within Billings and throughout the state of Montana, and deep respect for their ability and their presence in Billings and throughout Montana. And so that comes from forging from sharp competition and a similar vision for support for community. And obviously that family and that business has been very prominent in the city of Billings. Our efforts have been less so, but that doesn't mean that we have less of a commitment to the community. Our efforts here today, I think, is a great leap forward for not only High Country's business, but potentially for the city of Billings to leverage our project to extend water and sewer to this location and then potentially add more tax base, add tremendous jobs and prominent there. So I appreciate your question and comment, and we don't dismiss that concern at all.
Great, thank you. Other questions for staff? Councilmember Shaw, Neese, and Ronning?
Thank you. Debbie, this is a question for you, and hopefully a quick one. I apologize if I missed it, but can you go over the annexation piece of this? So when would, what's the annexation deal, and when would these properties be annexed into the city?
Wyeth is going to talk about annexation. He knows the process better than I do.
Yes, thanks, Mayor and Council and Councilmember Shaw. So the way, and Debbie had hit on this earlier on in her slides, but what we're looking at here is for this specific property that's where this project would develop would be the first actual annexation petition for this area. Before that, what would be coming to you after the feedback you're providing direction tonight, actually for both the Mitchell Alkali Creek property as well as this, is that we would be bringing forward a proposal to amend the annexation map. This property and the properties you saw along the alignment that Debbie showed from Elysian School, as well as up by Alkali Creek, are in the long-range urban planning area. To bring those into the city, they would need to be in the city annexation area. So with this, with the city saying, yes, we are looking at extending services and providing these areas for service to be brought in the city, we would then come forward with those map amendments. And then following that, relatively quickly with this project, and from what I understand also with the Mitchell project, relatively quickly, then annexation petitions would be coming following that to actually move forward with, in this case, the construction project. So the whole, the map amendment, the annexation petition, annexation, and then building permit process and everything would go forward.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese and then Ronnie.
Thank you. I actually have a question for the applicant. Joe? Do I understand correctly that you're currently on First Avenue South?
Correct.
How many employees are working or employed there that will then be relocated over to the new plant? And then will that other property be vacated?
Correct. There's approximately 60 full-time personnel at that location now, and all of those jobs will be retained and moved over to the Harnish Business Park, and then plus the 50 that we anticipate adding after completion of the distribution and the manufacturing center. And then I don't have any even short-term plans, but just disposing and alternately reusing the First Street location.
Reusing it for within your own company?
I don't even believe that we would retain it, probably market it and put it into another use, but I haven't gotten that far. I've got a lot more
Thank you.
shoes to drop.
And Mayor, I have a question for Debbie, if you don't mind.
Debbie.
Debbie, you mentioned $250,000 from the city, $250,000 from Big Sky. I guess it was the opportunity fund they mentioned that they're going to vote on. And then it was mentioned tax abatement, but I didn't see any figures or numbers or what the tax abatement plan was. Do we know what that's going to cost and how long that's going to run?
Do you want to?
So we don't, I don't know, whatever component Big Sky can add kind of the parameters. We wanted to be really clear tonight that you should anticipate that, and I'll let Allison talk about what it's looking like at this stage.
Right. So we wanted you to see the full package of what this effort's going to take to make sure this investment happens in our community. And so I think we put up here, concurrent with annexation, we'd begin the tax abatement process. So it'd be both a city and county tax abatement. It would most likely be a 10-year because there isn't an existing structure unless there's some questions around if they acquire a different property. So we kind of have to figure that out. But in some initial analyses, the tax base that the city would still gain, even if an abatement were in place, under the 10-year model, there would still be tax increment that the city would be receiving even in the highest year of abatement. So we can work on those exact numbers and we'd be coming back to you probably within the next month or two. So you would have all of that full picture in front of you.
So we don't have a rough estimate of what that amount is? So
the remaining amount that would come to the city in a 10-year tax abatement in the most advantageous to the business, so the 75% abatement that gets gradually reduced over time, you'd still be getting just over $100,000 to the city. The abated amount is around $50,000, I think, specific to the city mills. But those are just ballpark numbers that we work through with the Department of Revenue to kind of ballpark what it would be valued at, full build out, et cetera.
Okay, so did I hear you correctly, $50,000 for the total 10 years?
No, it'd be $50,000 per year, but even with that, you'd still be getting just over $100,000 a year to the city. So you're abating around 50, you'd be getting 100,000, and then it graduates over time. So it's a phased approach.
So about $500,000 would be the total approximate abatement.
I would have to add that up, but that's definitely something we can get a full picture of for you, and we plan to when we come for a tax abatement.
Thank you.
Chris, you want to follow up on that?
The only piece I would add, and it kind of goes between both questions from Councilmember Shaw and Neese. So what is customary to this, not unique, is we're not talking about a future annexation. This is all in being annexed into the city as a condition of connecting to utilities and paying city taxes day one. We also wanted to be upfront versus going out in the county, building the project, getting a county tax abatement, and then coming into the city, that the tax abatement is going to come to the city along with the annexation to the city and the utilities to the city. So I apologize, we don't have more detailed numbers. They'll be based on what the law allows. And very similar to what's been customary and approved at the county level, but you're going to be the ones being asked to review and approve versus all this happening in the county and bringing it into the city afterwards.
Councilmember Ronning?
My question is for Joe. And while you're walking up, I just really appreciate the work that's been done by Big Sky Economic Development and Chris and Wyatt and whomever else to bring these types of projects to us and these types of projects to Billings. I wish more people were up at the podium more consistently bringing these types of things to Billings, and hopefully this is a really good start for us again. So we've heard tonight about the potential of 400 plus homes that might be developed. You know, Billings is not unique, and we just had this conversation. Billings is not unique in that we have a lot of jobs that are being offered right now, but people aren't filling those jobs. And we have that experience right here in the city. We just learned that we're short 10, I think Debbie shared with us that we're short 10 drivers for our sanitation trucks and no applications coming in. So we're hearing about development of homes, and then we're hearing about a potential 50 jobs that could come to our community, and we've heard they're high-paying jobs. So could you define what high-paying is? Is it a job that provides the opportunity to actually buy one of these 400 homes, and we've heard a real estate agent tell us that they could be $500,000 homes, or is it a job that can afford to buy a home in Billings and grow our tax base in that way?
Thank you for your question. I'm afraid I can't answer the second part of your question. I would be able to answer the part about what we see now as the wage range and the jobs that we see coming to the new manufacturing facility. And then again, in general, because we are early and there is some time, of those 50 jobs, between 40 and 45 would be at that threshold that the state of Montana uses for Yellowstone counties to include wage and benefits of $23.73 an hour. And so we anticipate all of those jobs being at that level, and then the remainder of those jobs being managerial or executive that would be paying significantly higher than that. Mm-hmm. So whether those jobs can afford a house in Billings is beyond my experience and opinion, but we believe that the jobs will be well-paying jobs for Billings and match the skills and experience that they'll be bringing to the project.
Okay, and if I can follow up too, have you had any issues in Missoula or anywhere, Rapid City or any other place, Bismarck, where you're struggling to get people to apply for those jobs as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, but I have high hopes for Billings. I do, and thank you so much for coming. The issues this council is facing is consistent from other Montana cities, cost of housing related to wage growth and wage maintenance, new jobs, infrastructure services. It's a consistent conversation. Yeah, challenging. But thank you for looking at Billings. Really appreciate it, and welcome, and glad to have you here. I'm all about competition, so glad to have you here.
No, we're glad to be here.
And Joe, I don't know whether Debbie has told you, but one of the provisions of that agreement is that you're required to move to Billings, mm-hmm. where you can get a cheaper house. Mm-hmm. So welcome to town.
A series of homes.
And hopefully your 140,000 square foot building doesn't require a piece of plywood, or you're going to be in trouble.
Thank you for the kind offer.
Okay, anything else for staff or development? Councilor Tricky?
I'm not sure who this is for, but this property is in the Esberg, right?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the Buffs as far as fire service. No, it is not in the tax increment district for, all this property is surrounded by county property. So this is a whole commercial area that has grown up all on septic and wells and out in the county.
Okay.
Tibetan turf country. Okay. Okay, anything else before we conclude this item? I'm not hearing anything else, not hearing any directions to staff, so we'll look forward on a future agenda next week. Oh, yes, thank you very much. I'm just anxious to go home. This is our opportunity for public comment. Would anybody like to comment on this? Please come forward. 3 minutes. Give us your name and address. Anybody like to comment? You're welcome to do so, even though I'm trying to rush us through. No? Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Any items of council discussion before we go to public comment on non-agenda items? Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to discuss the fireworks issue that Chris brought up. Laurel allowed fireworks in their city for a period of time. And I'd like to see our city allow that for period of time or some kind of defined. I'd like to hear what other council members think about that and get their opinion.
Okay, council members Joy and Ronnie.
Thank you. Great minds think alike, Roy. I wrote an email on this very thing. Yeah, I would also like to say, you know, some people feel like we're draconian because we have a ban, but it doesn't really get enforced. Councilmember Ewald was talking about in his neighborhood how many fireworks went on. So I think there's a middle path here where we can have something we can enforce, something we can regulate, and at the same time not feel like we're disallowing too much. So I'm also interested maybe time limits, dates when that they would be allowed, and maybe those are avenues that we could pursue to find a happy medium. Maybe even some of the size of the fireworks that people use. I don't know what they used to call them M16s or something, and they throw M80s, sorry, M80s, and they threw them into the garbage cans, and you were just, constant. So maybe there's some areas where we could say, we don't really want those types that are really disruptive. Thank you.
Councilmember Ronning and Brown.
Oh, I am draconian. I really oppose fireworks in the city, and I would be the one that would say no, and I think we need to enforce the policy of banning them and enforce it even stronger and give our public safety officials the opportunity to enforce that ban. I think there is a place for fireworks, and I think it's done by professionals. And I think people have the opportunity to go to a professional show. And I would welcome everyone going to a professional show. But yeah, I am one of those that would be opposed to that, so thanks.
Councilor Brown.
I would be all for opening it up in good conditions. I mean, if you're absolutely as dry and everything else, maybe you ban it that year. I would recommend if we go this direction, that we still look at areas that would be closed, the rims, things like that. I mean, you get a fire on the rims, it's just so difficult. And they can shoot them off in their yards or whatever, but kind of stay off the dry grass, because it's always dry grass in July up in that area. But I think it's a great idea. They shoot them off anyway.
Okay. Councilor Boyette, Shaw, Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't tell you the number of phone calls I've gotten in the last week here criticizing the fireworks. And I have to go along with the constituents that say they don't want this. And the biggest problem is we don't. And I refer him to the chief of police. I say, I'm sorry, but most people in the ward don't want popping firecrackers all night long.
Councilmember Shaw and Ewald.
Thank you. I really appreciate bringing this up. I would definitely support some with parameters, as Councilmember Brown's. I think we need the time limits, the dates, all of it needs to be quite narrow. But I just wanted to speak up on behalf of people with young kids. It is extremely difficult to not allow them to do even sparklers at home right now. And I don't let my kids do it. And they don't understand why. And it seems like we can keep that at least safe. So for me, I would like to see some of that allowed, because I think while we can go to fireworks shows for the big things, there are some little things that we have a lot of kids in the community that they don't get to experience because of the ban. Thanks.
Councilor Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Personally, it doesn't bother me a bit. I go to bed and I don't even know they go off, so I really don't care. But if you're going to have an ordinance, you have to enforce it, and you can't put parameters on, like say you can't have an M80 because you can't have fireworks now and they don't enforce it. So how are you going to know who's setting off the M80? So that's not going to work. But my big problem is closing the rims to fireworks, especially when we have an ordinance that says you can't have fireworks. We're going to spend $4.6 million to put the rest of the Skyline Trail in, and we're going to shut it down over the 4th of July. It's the only summer holiday we have. Well, I guess now we got one that's kind of summer. that's just been started, but people come to Billings, and I drive the Airport Road a lot, and it's unbelievable how many vehicles are parked there every day, taking pictures and everything else, and we shut it down the only holiday in the summer. You got family and friends coming to town, you can't even pull off the road up there because it says no pulling off the road. So, and 3 years ago, it was open over the 4th of July, and there was no big incidents that I know of, so. Not because of the rims.
Okay, so we'll go back down to this end. Points I would just make, and I don't know how I come out on this one, but that we shouldn't think that if we were to allow fireworks, that the level of fireworks that we have today is what you would then see if it were legal. The reality is, I suspect that a huge portion of our population is complying with the law. They may not like it, but they're complying. And if all of a sudden the law changed, they would also follow the law and bring out the fireworks. So I think we would see a multi-fold increase in the use of the fireworks, which the big risk, I suppose, is discomfort for people and hours. And so hours might be another aspect that we would really want to crack down on, and also just the fire risk. I'm very concerned about a fire getting started in the rims where it's very difficult to fight it. Maybe you can't fight it. You get the steep slope. They move very quickly. A lot of very high-end homes. But whether you could just allow some traffic, whether you have to close all of the rims, that's, I guess, a different issue. Last thing is, I wish we had a good survey capability for our population. We keep coming back to this. I keep saying that Qualtrics, it might be an option that allows for relatively low-cost social media information gathering on what our population does think on little issues like this. So back to here, I know we're letting people comment a couple times, but this is a fun one. So Councilmembers Brown and Boyette.
I just had a remark or a comment, I guess. They didn't close the rims down to parking this year. The fire department and those guys patrolled it so that people weren't going down in the rims and on the trails and stuff like that. But the parking was allowed. They got to watch the fireworks. They got to look over our beautiful city, all of that. So I thought their solution this year was fantastic, because there's no way they could close that down and try to police that. So I was really impressed with them this year, letting people park, letting them use it, but closing it down so they couldn't foot traffic down into the rims and stuff.
And that is true, except for the trailhead 1 mile east for the parking area for Yellowstone Kelly. That was closed. Yeah. Councilor Boyette.
When I see the fireworks station 3 blocks up from my house in the county, there's nothing you can't stop the public. So I think the public wants the firecrackers. Maybe the older folks in the neighborhood don't like it. I don't know that there's an answer. I mean, I told the one guy to call the county commissioners and say, have them ban fireworks, don't even let them sell it. Why let them sell fireworks and then say you can't pop them? I mean, how dumb was that? Yeah. Yeah.
Boyette for county commission. Okay, we should move on soon to public comment on non-agenda items. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I would just like to say, at school we have this thing called Granny's Wacky Prizes. So are you allowed to make a paper airplane and fly it across the room? No, but when you have a reward, you get a Granny's Wacky Prize. And one of those prizes can be, for 30 seconds, you can fly your airplane across the paper airplane across the room. So when you completely ban something, you sometimes increase people's desire to want to do it despite banning it. If you allow it within parameters, sometimes you get better compliance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. Good discussion. Public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on anything that was not on our agenda tonight? If so, please come forward. Keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, and tell us your name and address.
Dennis Olvestead, 3040 Central Avenue, Apartment A, 102. I'd like to show you guys what this is. This is a charter of Billings, Montana. I was asked several years ago, what are the two branches of the charter? And Royal Johnson, you previous know, asked me that. I didn't know. Of course, the two branches are the one, council, you guys, the legislative, and the executive, which is our administrator. What I wanted to do here, what the procedure was, I'd like to read section 303, City Council Election Terms and Conditions. And it says here, I won't go into it, it says council members shall be elected from wards. 2 council members shall be elected from each ward. Council member from each ward shall be elected every 2 years. Council members shall serve for terms of 4 years and shall be limited for 2 consecutive terms. In the past, council has abused this privilege because what they were doing, they're doing the 2 consecutive terms, which is 8 years, going away for 2 years, then coming back after the 2 years that were vacant and thinking that they could serve another 8 years. So that is, I was concerned about that. I think this, instead of 2 consecutive terms like that, we should just leave the word consecutive out and just have 2 terms. This way, you will not have that problem of people, you know, in the past abusing this and going 12, 13 years. And what's happening, if you don't get new council people in, what happens, you're going to get slow. You're going to be slow. You're going to have the same, let's say, over and over and over again. Once you get term limits, you're going to have new concepts, new ideas come into the area, and that is very good for the city. And I see back here that the consecutive terms were abused. And what we need to do is to amend this, the council, which does amend this to change it, because so the past has not doesn't happen again. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is it a term or is it a sentence? Next, go ahead.
Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South in Billings. I am amazed at your work and your tonight, especially on really hard things and big things. I've come the last few months to talk to you about what seems like a really small thing in comparison, and yet the implications, as I've written to you in emails and spoken to you here, are quite large for the city. We talk about developments and all the good things we talked about tonight and the challenges, but what good are they if our police department, if basic leadership of Billings is not seen as reliable or is seen as having integrity? I wanted to say, talk again about the incident, a small incident on December 6th, 2020, the Road Dog toy run, 5-minute incident in which I was assaulted by a Galloping Goose gang member. It's a 1%er, outlaw gang member. It's many of them, and I've written to you in my emails and spoken about it. What's disturbing to me and what has larger implications is that still, no matter it being looked at by the police department and investigated, and by the city's attorney's office, no one has interviewed that person, that gang member, about his assault. No one. And that's, to me, because it is a gang member, and because of the last 6 months, me looking at social media postings from gang members of the Galloping Goose and others, I see lots of connections with leaders in this town. I see lots of connections with the public in this town. That gang has an influence on you on the police department, and I've been saying that, and that's a huge issue. I really ask that, again, you as a group that oversees the police department, also has influence, or at least can speak to the city's attorney's office, that you speak to them and at least give me an answer as to why that person has not been interviewed and held accountable for what he did. Thank you again, all of you. I'm amazed at your work. I'm sitting here tonight watching you. But thank you, and good night, and go home, and peace be with you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on non-agenda items, things that were not on our agenda tonight? Seeing none, we'll close public comment on non-agenda items, and we are adjourned.